Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Third Impact Anime Podcast. I am your host, Austin, here, as usual, and with me I have my good friend, Bill. How's it going, Bill?
It's going pretty well. I am getting out of a casino while it's lighting up like I'm winning a jackpot on a pinball table.
I certainly hope that the money you've stolen is not counterfeit. That would be really disappointing.
Let's hope so. I need that money badly.
All right, and I've also got another good buddy with me. It is Mr. Tobias. How's it going, Tobias?
It's going pretty well. I'm currently involved in a car chase along the winding roads of Italy, and I don't know how I'm recording from there, but it's working.
Yeah, it sounds like a really quiet car chase. It's not. I don't even hear any sounds of the car or the bad guys shooting at you or anything like that.
Well, you know, it's Italy, it's Europe. It's this very pastoral Miyazaki-esque scene, so very, very peaceful.
I just thought your pop filter was that good.
Oh, he could be driving like an electric car, like a Tesla or something.
There you go.
Oh, my goodness. And with us is a extremely special guest, a Mr. Daryl Surat. How's it going, Daryl?
Hey guys, glad to be on the show with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. For those that are not aware of your illustriousness, can you sort of describe who you are as a person and a physical entity on this planet Earth?
Sure, I can go ahead and do that. As it pertains to the interest level of the people listening to this show, I am a producer and co-host of the Anime World Order podcast. Been doing that since 2006 or thereabouts. I am also a longtime anime convention attendee, panelist, that sort of stuff. Never volunteer. That's the lesson I always learned, from not doing anything. In addition, I'm a writer for Otaku USA magazine. I've been writing since issue 1. And we're still kicking, after about 11 plus years. And lately, within the last, couple of years, I also am an occasional contributor to the Anime News Network.
Cool. And what sort of stuff have you guys been up to at AWO lately?
Well, we just recorded an episode with a special guest of our own, so to speak. It's our yearly trivia episode, which is quite popular. Even though Gerald thinks it's not popular, he doesn't have access to the metrics. So I can tell you that one was fairly, it's going to be pretty fun. Good thing to listen to for those of you who have like a very long drive to your relatives and need something to break up that silence. We also just released a new episode a couple weeks ago with Mike Toole, also from the internet. That one was about Gundam Reconquista in G, which we threatened to review many months ago after the last one that we did involving Yoshiki Tomino and questionable narrative choices. And so we are back at it again, pretty scary. We released it on Halloween, so it's a Halloween-themed episode. Pretty scary stuff. So that's basically what's been going on over on our podcast side, over at www.animeworldorder.com.
So that's what you're doing with AWO, but what articles have you got working on the magazine?
So as we speak right now, the next issue of the magazine is being put together, so I probably can't talk about it just yet on account that I don't fully know exactly what my assignments are going to be. I'm not like keeping it a secret or anything. I just don't actually know. So it's good that we're doing the recording now because in a day or two, I'm going to have a bunch of things that are due in a fairly short span of time. As far as writing of mine that people can read right now, we have like a special called Anime USA. Like maybe there's 4 issues a year of that.
Right.
Those come out. The latest one is available. It's on newsstands right now. We also put up select articles of it on the website at otakuusamagazine.com. So you can go and check that out as well. And as far as the Anime News Network, the latest thing that I wrote a review of was for the latest PlayStation 4 Fist of the North Star game, Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, which is the Fist of the North Star game as made by the makers of the Yakuza series.
Ooh, yeah, I've been hearing really good press about that. I've been wanting to play that.
It's very good. I mean, you can go ahead and read my article. It's up there. But basically, it is literally like everyone who makes Yakuza, including like the voice cast of Yakuza, is present just doing Fist of the North Star this time. and all the ridiculous, wacky side quests and stuff like that, and the localization hijinks that you've come to love out of Yakuza are here and for Fist of the North Star. I will say that it's not as accessible as I would like it to be, because they kind of market it as, hey, Yakuza fans, here's Fist of the North Star, when really it's, hey, Fist of the North Star fans, here's Yakuza. Doesn't mean it's total nonsense, because there's a certain degree of nonsense to be expected from playing Yakuza in the first place, because there may be a variety of guest celebrities and such that you may encounter that the average player here may not know who these people are. They're just some weird person who pops up, and then you get into a fist fight. Similar levels of logic are on display in Lost Paradise. I do highly recommend it to everyone who's a fan of Yakuza, and especially to everyone who's a fan of Fist of the North Star.
Is there enough head exploding to your liking?
There is even more head exploding than there is in the Japanese version, because the Japanese have laws. Their video game reviews is like, you're not allowed to have like decapitations and stuff like that in their games. So our version of it, you actually get to see like the people explode. In the Japanese version, they kind of have to do like what they did on the TV show, where they sort of like turned a silhouette and then you see like a black shadow explode.
But isn't that quite the opposite, in the sense that wasn't there something where we couldn't see the main character die, so every time you die in the game it just fades to black? That's
fake. That is a post that Dave Cabrera made, which I immediately corrected him on, but that post that he made got several thousands of retweets and shares because it sounded like it could be true, but it's easily demonstrable as false, and the retraction, nobody reshared that.
That's how it goes.
Ain't that just the way? Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like Twitter.
All right. Well, speaking of video games and stuff, Bill, you been playing anything lately?
Mostly a small little indie game called Red Dead Redemption 2.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you guys should check it out. It's like it could be the next Undertale.
My biggest objection to Rockstar games is this control scheme where you have to continually mash a button to run at a reasonable speed.
Don't get me started on the control scheme, because it's like a evil monkey's paw with Rockstar games, where we have this really cool world and really developed characters, but we have a very old control scheme that seems like it's out from 10 years ago.
But that was never even a thing in Vice City and stuff like that. They added it later just to be annoying.
People are going to play it anyway.
Well, yeah, of course people are playing it anyway. And they said, like, what, in 8-9 days it already outsold the first Red Dead Redemption, which sold 17 million copies over its lifetime.
Man.
Something like that. It's not at GTA 5 sales levels yet, but with all Rockstar games, they're making their money back.
Oh yeah, and then they're gonna launch the multiplayer, which it's a mystery to me who is playing GTA 5 in such massive numbers and quantities that they're making so much money off of GTA 5 years later to this day, thanks to the multiplayer of it.
I think it's the same people who buy Madden and FIFA and Call of Duty every year. It's just it's one of those. It's big among the masses, but it's among, I guess, more niche fans of RPGs or.
My understanding is that those games are just rife with cheating, like GTA I'm talking about, such that a lot of it is people buying multiple accounts over and over again. I don't know the background of it. I just know, like, when I see the billions of dollars that they made off of GTA 5 and people playing it online, I'm like, I don't know a single person who plays GTA 5 online. And Red Dead Redemption 2, when the online mode starts, I guarantee you I will not be touching it.
No, I won't be touching it either. I'll be looking at it as a curiosity, but I'll just be happy in my single player where I won't have to be dealing with a number of a-holes online. I don't want
and microtransaction hell, don't forget that.
Oh yeah, with their weird mini expansion things.
I think they're going to do a more of a zombie thing like they did last time.
I actually thought that was clever, but at the time it wasn't the default thing to do in every single game. And at least that was a single player thing.
So, yeah, I have almost no familiarity with Rockstar games in general, so I'm just really evaluating by what I see on the shelves, and I thought, oh, so they're doing zombies, so it's got to be like a multiplayer thing, right? But that's kind of interesting that it was like a story mode thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's like the Red Dead 2 is a prequel to the first Red Dead Redemption. So if you played that, you probably have some investment because John Marsden is a recurring character, and because it's on the new systems, it's a gorgeous looking game. And I think unlike for me the GTA games, which can get very tiresome because it's very cultural, like reference heavy, because it's a different time period. That's what makes me interested in Red Dead and why I also liked Bully back in the day.
And they are making a Bully 2.
They keep saying that's happening, but I don't believe them because they haven't given a release date. They haven't given us a screenshot. Nothing. Like, I think the composer from the first Bully said, like, we're working on it, but maybe that was like from 5 years ago. So I'll believe it when I see it.
Similar to about every two-thirds of everything that Guillermo del Toro has announced.
Exactly.
Yeah, so, I would love to see his Haunted Mansion movie. That would be amazing, but I feel like a lot of those ideas he just used in Crimson Peak anyway. But, I mean, if it's for a Haunted Mansion movie, I would totally be down for him sort of rehashing some other things and maybe making it more fun.
Maybe if he does the Haunted Mansion movie, he can direct it and do all the production design, but hire someone else to do the writing, because Crimson Peak's script was not very interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, Tobias, have you been watching anything or playing any video games?
I'm pretty much just continuing to keep up on my seasonal anime stuff. I'm still watching Gridman. I just watched the most recent episode right before we started the podcast. It's finally moving into like the world building kind of background stuff that we all kind of assumed what was happening. There was an Inferno Cop joke, very quick Inferno Cop joke, a la Trigger. I started watching the new Guda Guda thing, Himote House, which I don't think is quite as funny as there is as Guda Guda Fairies, but is still pretty enjoyable, I think. And of course, Zombieland Saga still is pretty funny.
Yeah, I'm about a week behind on all my shows, but I'm about watching the same thing, watching Gridman, watching Zombieland Saga, watching JoJo's, so it's all pretty good. Typically, I don't keep up with seasonal anime very well, but this season I've been doing better than expected. But Daryl, you're a Toku fan, so have you checked out Gridman yet?
I mean, I'm not really a diehard tokusatsu fan like how other people I know are. I'm very, very informal. I am watching Gridman, though the fact that like there are entire audiences of people who are appreciating that show on an entirely other level than me, to be able to spot like all the Transformers references that are in that. There's a lot in there. Some of it's really obvious, and I feel like really stupid for not realizing, oh, that's the Matrix of Leadership on her notebook or something like that. Like, I didn't notice, like, these characters are kind of humanized versions of the Transformers, like some of these background characters. Then for people who are fans of the original Gridman, which is fan subbed, you can watch it that way rather than the Americanized version where they get the SSSS from. You know, there are hints of like, hey, this is in the same continuity as that original show that are just starting to come out within the last episode or so.
Yeah.
People were kind of unsure at first, like, oh, is this a reboot? Is this a sequel? Like, what is going on here? And then, you know, it started to be a little more clear. But I never really watched, like, growing up, the rip-off version of it, or, you know, within the last few years when it got fan-subbed, went back and watched Gridman, the original show. But, you know, I am following people who are heavily invested in this stuff, who are freaking out each episode with, like, oh, there's the cool reference for that. Much like how, when I was watching Kill la Kill, I could see, there's the old anime reference there. So people are getting that sort of stuff out of Gridman that is, if you don't know it, it doesn't matter to your enjoyment of the show. But if you do get it, it's like, they're working on this other level here. And that's how I think the best use of referential type things is, as opposed to your Ready Player Ones of the world.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean,
what do you mean you've never seen The Shining?
No, I started watching the anime with no experience to the original at all. Didn't really think much of it. Like you said, it's not really necessary. But I've been watching the original just kind of, you know, on breaks at work and whatnot, and being able to sort of sync those together and see the references to like the special hot dog they mentioned in episode 1, and like the sound spirits they just mentioned here in the last one it's a pretty cool tie-in, but not necessary to the enjoyment of it for sure.
しまいそう見つめる景色空の青さも全部汗ばむ季節の虚無感の答え誰も知らないんだな思い出せなくてもきっと僕らの出会いはどこかで何かでつながれていた明日だってその先だって隣で
So I've not been playing a whole swath of video games myself, other than getting very into Dark Souls Remastered, because I came into the Souls series a little bit late, because my first Souls game was Bloodborne, and then I played Dark Souls 3 after that and thought, man, I just really wish I could play this game a lot faster, because I enjoyed Bloodborne so much. But going back to playing Dark Souls Remastered on the Switch, which I got it for the Switch for basically the sole purpose of I could play it like on the go. I probably wouldn't have bought it if it wasn't on the Switch, but I've been enjoying that a lot and getting more used to the Dark Souls mechanics as opposed to the Bloodborne mechanics. And it's been a lot of fun. It's kind of weird because it's not a proper remaster per se. It's more just like an upscale, so it doesn't look as excellent as like Bloodborne or Dark Souls 3 do. But I hear it does look better on the PS4 version. But that's been a lot of fun. It's gotten a lot more fun because I found a really easy way to grind for souls. So that always makes the frustrations a little bit more easy to deal with. But Daryl, isn't your dad a big Souls fan?
Yeah, my dad is in his mid-60s and, is only started playing video games for the first time a few years ago. And yeah, he plays all the Dark Souls games. He plays all of them. He's got like thousands of hours like in each one, basically. And he's really big into Neo. He's got like over 1750 hours in Neo, for example. And so the notion of gamers everywhere saying that Dark Souls is like super hard and stuff, my dad can't reliably remember which button is X and which button is circle. Okay?
Wow.
But these are games that are like even Neo, which, the Dark Souls nerds say is too hard. Neo's the only one of those types of games I've ever played, which I like that one. But they are not difficult in the way that like... a shooter or a fighting game is difficult. They're more memorization based. Like my dad, at his age, like if you put anything that requires a platforming section, he can't do it. Like by far the hardest thing for him in Dark Souls 1 is the stupid thing where you walk the planks and there's like the pendulums swinging back and forth and things that knock you off. Like that's like, but you don't have to jump. At least you just have to walk at the right time or roll at the right time. So it's a testament to basically those are games about patience. They're not difficult games such that everywhere gamers say like, oh, this is the Dark Souls of this, as if to suggest it's the most difficult thing you could possibly create. And that's I really don't like that that's been such an influence. Like independent game creators have taken the wrong lesson from Dark Souls as a general rule. Where they say, oh, it's difficult. That means it's like Dark Souls. It's like, no, Dark Souls is a specific kind of, quote, difficulty that can be overcome just through effort as opposed to grinding, as opposed to get good, which, there's just a horrible culture of Dark Souls that my dad has nothing to do with. So to the point where he says like, oh, all these streamers who say that Neo is too hard, they're all full of it. All these people who think that Dark Souls 2 sucks, like they don't know what they're talking about. Like, so, I think it's great that he at least has something. And then next year he's got, Sekiro and then that other one and then Neo 2. Like there's the floodgates are opened for that style of game.
You do have a point. It's like the Dark Souls games, they may have a learning curve if you're not used to that particular gameplay style, but like the more you play it, just if you have patience for it, it just gets easier as you play it, just kind of like anything in that regard. So it's not like impossible to beat, and that's sort of like the way that the game is structured. I mean, the game is structured to be able to be played. You just have to have patience with it, like you said.
Right. Like again, my dad in his mid-60s can't parry to save his life, but he can beat these games. And he can do it on like New Game Plus, New Game Plus, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
So, Daryl, we've heard from stuff you've been doing on like the more work-in stuff, but have you been playing or watching anything for fun?
Sure. I mean, obviously, there's a whole new season. There's always a whole new season of stuff. So I'm mostly watching JoJo's, Gridman, couple other things. Skullface bookseller Honda-san, very
nice.
Important. More than just a special Yaoi book meme that goes around. It's cutting to the core each week. In terms of video games, there's like a balance you have to strike between playing games that go on forever and playing single player games that are completable. And so even though I just bought like Hitman 2, like the fancy edition, I'm not going to have time to start it because I'm trying to play through Lost Paradise, which can be played through start to finish and beaten. And then you have other games that, you can play forever, such as Overwatch or Vermintide or, what have you, that I also, and I try not to play as much of them as I should, but of course they set it up so it's like, oh, there's a limited time event or there's new characters coming out, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're not careful, those games will steal your soul. So, I have to try to, maintain like the balance between one and the other. But the backlog is never ending.
True that.
So your best bet is you pick one game and then you have to like put Red Dead to the side. You got to put Hitman to the side. You got to put all these like big major things because it's like, nope, I'm going to play through this one thing. Because otherwise you just like play a thing and then a week or two later another thing comes out and it's like, oh, I'll put this to the side and come back to it. No, you won't. Stick with the thing you're on, even if it is not the zeitgeist thing.
And that is why it took me 2.5 years to beat Final Fantasy 15.
Final Fantasy 15 was probably not a game I would have spent 2.5 years devoting myself to.
Well, not 2.5 years straight by any means, but because I kept having to break and play other things. I say have to, but I chose to.
I feel your pain with the games as a service. I'm not a big Overwatch player, but I'm a big Hearthstone player, so I get into the groove of new expansions out, new cards, gotta play it. And when I could be playing really interesting single-player games like Hitman 2 or finishing up Red Dead 2, but nope, new expansion, gotta play it.
We did want to remind folks that we are having a giveaway, and we're very excited to do that because courtesy of Mr. Bill Foreman, we announced this back in our Memories episodes, and if you didn't listen to that, you can go back and listen to that as well. That would be wonderful. But Bill is giving away a free, brand new copy of The Rose of Versailles Volume 1, which is now out of print, unfortunately. But Bill has decided to grab a copy of that and give it away totally for free at the cost of only one iTunes review. We would love for you guys to pop over to our iTunes page and leave us a review, and it has to be 5 stars because we're just going to be like that. And if you go and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes and then pop over to our Facebook community and join us over there, that will be the only way that you will know if you have won or not. So if you don't have a Facebook page, you are a better person than I am, but you also won't be able to know if you have won or not. So, and that's very important to know if you have won, because you would not want to win a copy of it and then not get a chance to have it. So if you guys would like to have a complimentary copy of The Rose of Versailles Volume 1, which is how many episodes, Bill? 20-something?
25 or 26.
Cool. Yes, so it'd be a wonderful deal, and you definitely don't want to miss out on it. And that contest will end exactly 1 month from whatever the upload date was for the Memories episode. So keep that in mind. But with that being said, I guess we can move into our review.
I do have a question about that release of Rose of Versailles, just purely for ego purposes. Is the pull quote on the back from me still on the packaging for the thin pack release? They may have changed it, but the initial release of Rose of Versailles, it had a quote from me on the back as the endorsement.
Daryl is correct. His pull quote is on the back of the first volume.
Bill, would you like to read it for us?
Yes, in dramatic fashion. I would love to. The Rose of Versailles is the, in exclamation point, all caps, gold standard of shoujo anime, which all anime fans must see. Recommended. Daryl Surat, Otaku USA magazine.
I stand by that.
Okay, good. That's what I was going to ask. Wonderful. Alright folks, and we're back, and we're going to be talking about the Castle of Cagliostro. But before that, I just want to let everybody know about the many ways that you can connect with the Third Impact Anime podcast, or the panels that we tend to do at conventions on the internet. You can find us most easily over at facebook.com/thirdimpactanime. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/TI_anime. You can also find our website where we put up all of our show notes and interesting articles about seasonal anime or non-seasonal anime or various convention stuff. That's all up on the Third Impact Anime website, which is thirdimpactanime.wordpress.com. And Daryl, where can people find AWO and Otaku USA stuff?
Our website is www.animeworldorder.com. And Otaku USA can be found at www.otakuusamagazine.com.
Cool. All right. Well, Bill, you have written out a nice little plot synopsis about the Castle of Cagliostro, so would you do the honors of reading that for us?
Sure, I would love to. Okay. Lupin and Jigen have just robbed a big-time casino. Basking in their big score, Lupin realizes their loot is fake. In reaction, Lupin and Jigen head to Cagliostro, home of the legendary goat bills, which create perfect counterfeits. Throughout history, the goat bills were instruments in world events, from funding the armies of Napoleon to the stock crash of 1929. Many spies and government agencies have come to Cagliostro to find the goat bills, never to be seen again. Even Lupin has tried and failed to get the goat bills. Now he will try again. But this time, Lupin faces new challenges and mysteries. From a mysterious runaway bride with a past connection to Lupin, to the lecherous Count of Cagliostro trying to find the mysterious hidden fortune hidden by the Cagliostro family, Lupin must once again break into the Castle of Cagliostro. Will he fail once again, or come away with riches?
So, question for you, Bill. I noticed you mentioned goat bills repeatedly. Which version of the film did you watch?
Yeah, that's the manga dub version, and I have attachment to the manga dub, so that's why I put goat bills in there.
And the other one, what do they call them in the streamlined dub?
So in the streamlined dub, because this film has been dubbed into English multiple times, just for context's sake. But the streamlined dub, they didn't say the goat bills or anything like that. They just say, oh, they're counterfeit, or sometimes they would say, things made by Goto, because in the Japanese they say Goto bills, and so streamlined dub, it's like, oh, it must mean this guy's name is Goto, even though it's like there's a picture of goats everywhere in the film. But in fact, in the latest edition of the film, which is the Discotheque Blu-ray, which I must say, before we just underway ground rule, that is the definitive edition of the Castle of Cagliostro to get, is the Discotheque Media release of it. And if you have an attachment to the manga dub, the streamlined dub, they're on there. If you want the other translation, they're on there. You get to pick. But the latest translation, like the most accurate, would be to say they're Gothic bills. Because I actually thought the dub, when they said they were reading like the ancient text of it, that they said it was in Capron or something like that, which is a old. It's a term for goats, right? It's the genus, I think, not the species.
Mm-hmm. So I've asked Bill to do this multiple times with our other Lupin the Third reviews, but I won't ask him to do that this time. But in case other folks are not as familiar with Lupin the Third or haven't listened to our other review episodes, Daryl, do you think you could give us the very, very stripped down sort of idea of like what is the Lupin the Third franchise, like at its base level?
Sure, I think I can do that. Just as a disclaimer, I have done commentary tracks for some of the Discotheque Lupin the Third releases that are out there, so I can probably just do this off the top of my head without any preparation, because that's how I do things. Lupin the Third is sort of a unauthorized sort of ripoff of the classic French character by Maurice Leblanc called Arsène Lupin, the Gentleman Thief. Arsène Lupin was a character who would famously send a calling card to his victim saying, hey, I'm going to steal this from you on so-and-so time. There are a series of novels. This character is now in the public domain. When Lupin the Third was created in Japan, without the knowledge of the LeBlanc estate, it was not in the public domain. So anyway, Lupin the Third is the world's greatest thief. And so he is accompanied typically by another gentleman named Jigen Daisuke, who is an expert sharpshooter. And with him as well is Ishikawa Goemon the 13th, a supposed descendant of the legendary sort of Robin Hood figure in Japan, Ishikawa Goemon, who is a samurai who has a sword that can cut through basically anything. Then there is the femme fatale, sometimes friend, sometimes foe, Fujiko Mine, so named because she's got incredibly large breasts. And chasing them all is the Interpol detective, Inspector Zenigata. And so each episode, each film, each what have you, they are typically, in search of some other treasure or what have you, pulling some other caper. And so over 50 years now, they've been at it, and there's no sign of stopping.
Yep. Even as recently as this year, we got another Lupin the Third TV show.
Which was really good.
Mm-hmm. Lupin and the Silk Road.
Yeah, Lupin meets the modern day.
Well,
Right.
yeah, that's the thing, and we can get into this later, but, when we talk about Lupin the Third as a character, created so long ago, he's in some ways tied to the 60s, 70s, in a way very much like, say, James Bond. In fact, Lupin the Third, James Bond, Golgo 13, all these sort of characters kind of, were cross-pollinating, one another. And so there have to be multiple efforts to bring these characters into the modern era. And yet, even when you do so, there are certain things that sort of remain no matter what, that are kind of just fundamentally like anachronistic. Like, for example, Lupin's jacket. His clothes are very much, nobody wears this anymore, but now it's just Lupin the Third's signature blazer. Like, you can't not have him wear it. You can maybe change the color of it to let you know, hey, something new's afoot. So similarly, yeah, when you say the Silk Road, the latest season of Lupin the Third is all about, using the blockchain and, dealing with internet anonymity and people trying to troll you and, taking
social
advantage
media.
of social media engineering and, all the sorts of theft you can get away with through that because, as Lupin says, everything is still down to locks and keys.
So does that mean in part 6 that the main villain is going to be Elon Musk?
So there is an interesting connection back to the Arsène Lupin novels that this movie has, and that is the character and the name and the moniker of Cagliostro, because Cagliostro as a person is based on a real person that lived back in the 1700s, who is this sort of like strange magic dude or whatever. That's a very, very base level description of that. He's like just a quirky guy that would do like magic things. There's some not quite like a wizard, but more of like a magician, and that sort of historical character evolved into a recurring character in the Arsène Lupin novels. That sort of, as my understanding, was the character was embodied again by another like descendant of Cagliostro. And it was a girl. As my recollection states from what I read. But she was a recurring character in the Arsène Lupin novels, and I'm sure that probably had some sort of influence on the decision to go with this like Cagliostro theming direction for this film from those original novels. Even though, as far as my reading is concerned, it didn't really seem like there was that much connective tissue, but more of just like an inspirational sort of thing. So going back to the staff here on the anime itself. So this film was released in December of 1979. It is the second Lupin the Third movie, second to Mystery of Mamo that we reviewed back earlier this year. It was made in a very short 7.5 months from the project's original undertaking, with only about 5 months of actual production time. The Castle of Cagliostro is Hayao Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli's first featured directorial debut. He worked as a screenwriter and a designer and a storyboarder all in this film, as well as being a director. But before this, he had directed a number of the episodes of the Lupin the Third TV series. I think he worked on both Part 1 and Part 2, if my memory served me correctly.
That is correct. Though, if you want to get really like pedantic and weird about it, I'm not sure if he worked on the episode on the series 2 episodes until after this film, because, like you said, with the production of it, the second series ran about 152 episodes, and so I don't think those final episodes came out until after the film.
Yeah, because those episodes were in the hundreds, I believe.
Well, he basically did the very last episode and an episode close to the last episode. And those episodes were for many years, the only 2 episodes of the TV series that were available in the United States, dub only. So that and Castle of Cagliostro was all the Lupin the Third we had for some time. And then the floodgates eventually opened.
Right. So the screenplay was also written by an individual named Hayao Miyazaki, who was a scriptwriter on Kinnikuman, Space Adventure Cobra, both the movie and some of the TV series, and was a screenplay writer on TMS's Treasure Island, which was a very early discotheque release that is unfortunately out of print. And this was the only Lupin the Third thing that he ever worked on. So the animation director and the co-character designer is Yasuo Otsuka, who there is a really good interview with up on the on that discotheque Blu-ray. He worked on many other Lupin the Third works. He was the animation director for the first Lupin the Third TV series. He also directed The Mystery of Mamo and worked on Napoleon's Dictionary, the Fuma Conspiracy that we also talked about a few episodes ago, and a couple more of the specials and the TV series.
That's putting it lightly for who Yasuo Otsuka is, but we'll keep going.
Well, I mean, if you would like to elaborate on that, because I'm not as familiar with him.
Okay, well, this year, Isao Takahata passed away. And so I ended up doing looking back on the life of Isao Takahata, who was Miyazaki's, longtime collaborator. Effectively, Isao Takahata, was the guy who kind of brought Miyazaki into the fold, so to speak. And then Otsuka was sort of their, sort of mentor, as it were. And so, at Toei, it was Otsuka who pushed Takahata to be the director, to let this guy direct a movie. And then eventually when Otsuka left, he said, hey, why don't you guys come with me? And, so on and so forth. And so he stuck around for quite a while. He's still around. He's still alive, still at Telecom Animation Film, which is I believe the studio, because Studio Ghibli didn't exist at this time when Castle of Cagliostro was made. It's a Toho film. Ghibli didn't exist until the mid-'80s after Takahata spent a whole bunch of money and they had to figure out, what do we do to get out of the hole? We'll found a studio. So yeah, Yasuo Otsuka has a huge wealth of experience and things that are injected into both the lifeblood of Miyazaki and Takahata in various ways. This is one of those things where I don't want to bog this whole podcast down just on this point, but yeah, I mean, as far as like a cornerstone of, making Miyazaki, and so to speak, and what brings the magic, Otsuka is a big part of it.
And he did have some interesting things to say about Miyazaki in that interview. He basically it summed up as like, yeah, Miyazaki, he's a weird guy. And that's kind of the extent of it. But yeah, he went into a little bit more details as to why, but that's kind of the crux of what he was trying to say.
I also liked how Miyazaki got on him of just like, why do you keep doing Lupin stuff? You need to expand, keep doing more. And he's like, well, why don't you? You've done so much, you can stop. And he's like, no, I can't stop. So that interview was very entertaining.
And I gotta think that interview was probably at least 10 years old. I could be wrong on that, but it looked a little bit older. And Miyazaki still can't stop, apparently, because we've got another movie of his coming out.
Well, of course he
can.
He said he was going to stop, and then he realized another person made a movie that was better than his movie. And he's like, I can't let it end like this. I got to come back.
One last job.
He's still going to do that even after he's passed away. He's just going to rise from the grave and be like, I have to make another movie. All right, so the art director is also another notable member of the staff here. It's Shichiro Kobayashi. We talked about him at length in the Fuma Conspiracy episode, but he is a very iconic background painter and designer. He worked on the 90s Berserk series, Space Adventure Cobra the movie. He worked on Revolutionary Girl Utena, Go-Go 13 the movie, which I know is one of Daryl's favorites, and Angel's Egg. And all of them have a very distinctive, very detailed, very beautiful painterly art style to their art direction, so his stuff is very, very recognizable. I don't have a cast breakdown for this because if I recall correctly, it's basically the main Lupin cast, from the TV series.
Yeah, everybody reprises their roles. It wasn't until the Fuma Conspiracy where, as a cost-cutting measure, they said, we'll change out the voice cast, and, that led to a rift between Yasuo Yamada and, Monkey Punch from that point on, even though they eventually brought them all back. But yeah, it's everybody, they play those roles till the day they die. I mean, Kiyoshi Kobayashi is still Jigen, now. Everyone else is, either dying out or being replaced, as it were. So eventually, someone's going to have to, replace him, and could be anybody. But yeah, the point is that everyone came back. The only new characters are basically people who are introduced just for this film, which are, for, as you may guess, the Count Cagliostro, Lady Clarice, who I believe this might have been her debut role, Sumi Shimamoto, best known for being the voice of Nausicaa, later Miyazaki heroine. She's also in Maison Ikkoku and stuff like that. She was in that last episode that Hayao Miyazaki did. And so Farewell Lovely Lupin was 1980. That last episode of Lupin the Third Series 2. So yeah, I think this may very well be her very first role. And so she's just been in a ton of stuff over the years. But yeah, those are the things that I mainly remember her for.
So was that final episode, was that the one that has the robot from Castle in the Sky and the character that is basically Nausicaa?
That's correct. That is the final episode of Lupin.
Yeah, and it's funny because I did not watch the Japanese version because I had seen the manga entertainment version, but not the streamlined dub. So that this time around, I watched the streamlined version. So I did not know that she had that connection to Nausicaa. But because it had been many years, or not many, but a couple years since I had seen Cagliostro, and just looking at Clarice now, I was thinking, wow, she looks a lot like Nausicaa. So it's funny that she was actually voiced by the same person. Almost 3 times in that one-off episode, and in Nausicaa and in Cagliostro. So that's interesting how that worked out. I'm sure it was all probably quite intentional. Yeah,
Miyazaki has cast her a few times throughout the years.
Mm-hmm. All right, so since Daryl, you would probably be the first because you are the elder of the group here. So for you, how did you first discover this particular film, or just Lupin in general?
Well, this basically was, and will forever be the single most famous Lupin the Third work of all. I think it's just one of those things that is the result of it being, one, primarily in print in the United States, but two, it's a thing that it's effectively the standard bearer for all things Lupin the Third, for better or for worse, because once this came out, and when it did come out, it was not a success at first in Japan. It was actually kind of a flop. And it wasn't until years later that people realized, hey, wait a second, this is a masterpiece. And so then when they brought back Lupin the Third in the 90s and then on, they used this film specifically as like, this is the template for how Lupin the Third must be. If Cagliostro did it, we got to do something like that. And so Lupin the Third kind of became this sort of family entertainment, yearly special kind of thing for many, many decades thereafter. As for how I discovered it, it was the Streamline version. And then I sent away for a fan sub of in the Japanese, because Streamline Pictures in the 1990s, they did not release anime in Japanese with English subtitles. You did not get that option. They released everything they released dub only, with the exception of like Akira, which had like a very questionable subtitle job on it. And so I saw that, and then I saw what they released as, quote, Lupin the Third's Greatest Capers, which were the 2 Miyazaki episodes. So that was basically how I first saw Lupin the Third. I mean, I think my introduction to the character as a concept might have been like in the back pages or like the import section of Electronic Gaming Monthly, which is a print magazine about video games in the early 90s. There was like maybe a blurb about Lupin the Third, like a video game or something like that, with like a still shot because it's like a CD, FMV sort of whatever sort of thing. Not like the Laserdisc games in the arcade. Those I'd only heard about years later. I never ever saw the machine growing up as a kid. Those games are expensive. So, yeah, I mean, this was it. This was my introduction to it. And so then afterwards, everyone's like, oh, wow, Lupin the Third, where can I get more? And Anime Ego then said, okay, well, we'll release the Fuma Conspiracy, which you guys just reviewed in a previous episode. And that's the only other one that's kind of like Cagliostro, because Telecom Animation Film did the animation for it, and they kept most of the same staff as Cagliostro, with the exception of Miyazaki and a few other people. And so it was that I didn't actually, even though Streamline released it, I didn't actually watch Mystery of Mamo, aka Secret of Mamo, until well afterwards. And so the idea of like, oh, this is what Lupin is, if you use it like defined by Cagliostro and Fuma Conspiracy, and then you watch all the other Lupin, it's like, there's no other Lupin the Third that's like this movie or Cagliostro. Like, those Miyazaki episodes, like those are like the only ones where Lupin is like that. And then everything else is either a sharp deviation from that, or it's influenced by this. Like, oh, we have to pay respect to this because this is the masterpiece, and so Lupin must, incorporate these elements.
So whenever you like first physically put your eyeballs onto Lupin the Third, was it like at a anime club or at a convention or a tape you got on your own, or how did that first happen?
There were no anime conventions in my state of Florida when I was growing up, which is a hilarious statement to make, because once upon a time there were so many anime conventions in Florida throughout the 2000s that they just kind of, all deprived each one another's oxygen. So I didn't start going to an anime club until I was maybe 16 or so, once I was able to drive, because back then the driving's license age was 16. So I saw this, I would say, probably when I was 14 or 13, maybe 15 or so, like around that time. And the way I got it was because I was very fortunate in that the local comic book shop, the owner of it was a fan of anime. This is not a common thing, by the way, as far as comic book shop people go. But he was a big fan of Akira and a big fan of Crayon Shin-chan. And so they would buy all the anime tapes and then rent them out for $2, which when you're a teenager, you can rent anime for $2 much easier than you can buy anime for $30 a tape. And so I rented the Castle of Cagliostro and Lupin the Third's Greatest Capers, those tapes, and saw them that way on my own accord, just because I knew from reading very early era, can't even really call it like the internet as we know it. It's Usenet and stuff like that said like, oh yeah, you got to go watch, Hayao Miyazaki. He's the master. You have to go track down all his stuff. And so once I saw that, I put in my order. I had to get my Nausicaa, my Kiki's delivery service, my Laputa Castle in the Sky, and my Castle of Cagliostro, you name it. I just was like, got to get these things.
So for you, Bill, since my way into Lupin was directly inspired by yourself, because the first time I watched this movie was with you sitting down at college a couple years ago. So how did you find Cagliostro? Did you get into Lupin before you saw Cagliostro, or was this like the first thing?
This was like the first Lupin thing I ever saw. Funny enough, I got into it thanks to my brother, because at the time the manga release was pretty cheap to find everywhere, and he had gotten really into Miyazaki at the time, so it's kind of similar to Daryl. He wanted to get all the Miyazaki movies because he was the master. So he got the manga release at the time, and we watched it, and I guess for some reason it didn't really stick with me at the time, but compared to the other Miyazaki movies, but just going back a second time just kind of really connected it to me. And I think, funny enough, the thing that got connected me to the Lupin franchise was seeing the Episode 0 special at a convention, and just how, for me, how fun that was. And so it was a mixture of Episode 0 and Castle of Cagliostro that got me into Lupin.
And what about you, Tobias? Because I know you're kind of just now getting into Lupin thanks to our, synergy.
Yeah,
if you want to call it that.
Thanks to your efforts. So about 10 years removed from Daryl, I had like one guy in high school that was really into Lupin the Third. This was back when it was airing on Toonami or Adult Swim. He's really, really trying to push everyone to watch it, but I just, wasn't really my thing at the time. And I kind of forgot about Lupin for the most part up until the past few years, where it's, just looking online and seeing the anime fandom online is still really into it. This group of fans that are still really into the Lupins and the different color jackets, all of that. And I've just sort of absorbed Lupin through osmosis that way, where I see these characters as really more iconic as just an icon rather than a series that I really had to absorb individually.
I think a lot of that is a function of the fact that for feels like about a quarter of a century, Lupin the Third has been treated as exactly that. Like, hey, well, we're obliged to release something each year, made for TV special, like a TV length movie, and it's not going to be too crazy or too out there, and we're just going to be like kind of just coast along on, be relatively derivative. And that's not to say that I dislike all those specials. Some of them are actually quite good. Episode 0, as you mentioned, I really do like that one a lot. But there are a lot that are nothing to write home about. And so it wasn't until, maybe like a few years ago that, the Lupin the Third TV series, people were like, okay, we need to knock these out of the park. And I would contend that, the more modern Lupin the Third TV series, whether it's the woman called Fujiko Mine, which is very different, and then Lupin the Third Series 4 and now 5, all of those are really, really good.
Yeah, I probably would have completely continued to ignore the series had it not been for Fujiko Mine in 2012 or so.
Yep.
I did catch a few episodes of that and really, really enjoyed the aesthetic there. Made with a lot of the same team that worked on Redline, I believe.
Takeshi Koike did the character designs for it, but he didn't handle the animation for it. And so the animation isn't quite, what he was sort of hoping for. And so then he did a special, Jigen's Gravestone. And that was like directed in the animation also, and Telecom Animation Film, who is generally now the Lupin the Third go-to studio. They made a big deal. Telecom Animation Film doing the animation this time, folks. So we're not messing around with the, vehicle chases and stuff like that. And then he did another one, The Blood Spray of Goemon Ishikawa, which is also really, really fun stuff.
Yeah. I think definitely with Fujiko Mine and the new movies coming out, just seeing clips of those really got me interested in, going back and checking these iconic characters and seeing what they're about.
Yeah, I believe Fujiko Mine was for the 40th anniversary or 45th. I did a commemorative panel for Lupin the Third for like the big anniversary that it was celebrating, and now another 5 years have passed. I believe, it was the 45th year anniversary in 2012, because I believe 50th year anniversary was last year. And so that's part of what is driving like these new Lupin the Third projects, is that there are these milestone, for the creation.
Little side tangent. I hope that Goemon's the Goemon movie comes out at some point. Yep, because I know Jigen's Gravestone got released by Discotheque. It's just the Goemon one is still in limbo for some reason.
I think that's one of those time limit exclusivity things because, Japan likes to have their limited edition with their fancy art book and all that kind of stuff. And they don't want the American release coming out that's super cheap too soon. It's very much like Gundam in that sense. But I'm fairly confident that Discotheque is going to release it when they can.
Mm-hmm. So, Daryl, did you notice any significant peak that occurred in people's general awareness of Lupin whenever it was running on Toonami for the first time?
So, certainly the Toonami run in the early 2000s was a more widespread introduction of Lupin the Third to a generation of people. Lupin the Third was never this huge widespread thing. Even throughout the 90s, a couple people knew about it that were into it, but as a rule, it didn't have the saturation that anything on television would get. Everyone could see Sailor Moon, everyone could see Dragon Ball, everyone could see Gundam Wing, and what have you. Mm-hmm. And so even though that Adult Swim broadcast was not necessarily seen as a big success at the time, as far as the ratings are concerned, a lot of people saw it that way and were introduced to Lupin in that way. And so that's what sort of led to Funimation releasing, their specials and, people reissuing Castle of Cagliostro, for example, that manga DVD. I think my timing is off on that by about a year as far as when that reissue happened. But I believe it was in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, I think the manga release was put out in the early 2000s, 2000.
Yeah, probably maybe even the year 2000, or if not. And so the TV one came out later. But yeah, I mean, that was really when I think there started to be a little more effort toward okay, we can have a specialized Lupin the Third message boards, and back when people used message boards and that sort of stuff. But yeah, there really wasn't a significant major organized here's our Lupin the Third things. There was just more a key group of very dedicated people, many of whom are still around.
Do you think it was more the floodgates opened because of Fujiko Mine and the more recent successes?
Difficult to say. I mean, Fujiko Mine was seen by people who are into the simulcast era of fandom, which is more the modern stuff. I don't know how many of those people who saw Fujiko Mine then went and tracked down Lupin the Third, because that's a divisive show. I love it. I think that's another one that's got a pull quote from me on the box, by the way. But the thing is that the appeal of Lupin the Third to different fans can differ widely. And that's part of why the Castle of Cagliostro was not seen as a success. And I'm going to basically regurgitate something I wrote in 2012, which then got taken and put into the Wikipedia entry for this film. I noticed as I was checking, oh, they're just quoting me. But the thing that made Lupin the Third, the original series, stand out so much was, to a large degree, the fact that it was ostensibly set in the real world. For all its flights of fancy and impossible physical feats, there were real guns, real cars, real booze, real types of clothing, et cetera, had that same sort of appeal as James Bond in that sense, right? You read those Fleming novels and he's talking in detail about this is the kind of booze that I drink and these are the cigarettes that I smoke and et cetera, et cetera. Lupin the Third had that same level of detail. When I talk about that, I mean the anime, because it wasn't so much the original Monkey Punch manga, but the anime, the original one, they went for that and people were into it. And so when Miyazaki did the Castle of Cagliostro and when they stepped in on those later episodes of the first series, he wrote about this in 1980, an issue of Anime Edge. I happen to have the article right in front of me, but he made a conscientious effort of I don't like that the 70s are all apathetic. In the 60s, everything was about hey, check it out, man. We're going for it. And so he changed up like the gear that Lupin the Third had, to say it lightly. The car, for example, the gun, the lighters, etc., all changed under Miyazaki. And so the longtime fans, they looked at this like, Lupin the Third shouldn't drive a crappy car like that. Whereas now the Castle of Cagliostro is so famous, like when I think of what is the Lupin the Third car, I think of the Fiat. I don't think of the Mercedes. And, it's actually, when you look at the grand body of Lupin the Third works out there, it's actually the Mercedes is his default car. But that sort of thing then carries over into Fujiko Mine as far as why people are divisive on it. People are expecting really crazy, accomplished key animation cuts out of Lupin the Third. And Fujiko Mine is much more stylized. Fujiko Mine is much more about its narrative and the mental states of its characters. And while there are parts that look cool, it mostly has people standing still and talking, which I don't mind. But for people who are looking for like really fluid animation, I know some people who are diehard fanatics who, like Fujiko Mine, broke their will to watch anime anymore because it's like, God, Lupin is dead. That sort of thing.
Jeez.
Wow.
Man.
And I was like, okay, well, I guess if the only thing that you really care about is key animation, which is, a portion of the fandom now, or, they all use Sakuga as a word now because of that. Fujiko Mine may lack. And so, when they came back for this new part 4 and 5, they were like, okay, we'll bring the animation back up and, give a little bit sort of grand unification for everybody. But yeah, so like the fandom of Lupin the Third is very heavily dependent, I think, on what's your baseline? What's the thing that you saw first that is like, aha, that's what Lupin is to me, and it can vary. It's a little fractured.
That's kind of funny because for me as a Lupin fan, I pretty much like all the styles of Lupin, whether it be kind of the monkey punch 70s nihilism, more cynical Lupin, to the more lighthearted Castle of Cagliostro, to the more stylized Fujiko Mine. Like, some of the specials are really bad, but in general, I like all types of Lupin.
Well, sure. I'm also in that boat. But as far as I think the fandom is concerned, I think people have to like dive in sort of deep to find that, oh, wow, there's this variety to it. There's this versatility to these characters. Even Hayao Miyazaki is like, none of that's the real Lupin. Lupin the Third was a product of the 60s and 70s, damn it, and all this other stuff is just garbage. That's Hayao Miyazaki's take on it, the Cliff Notes version. But I'm like you, and that's part of why I like this latest series so much, because it takes elements of Cagliostro and it takes elements of the 70s series, takes elements of the wacky 80s series, it takes elements from the original, like more hard-boiled stuff, and it just gives you something for everybody.
So I think that's a good way to sort of hone in on Cagliostro itself, to sort of examine like what exactly are these elements that people latch onto about specifically this movie. And I think a lot of it is just Miyazaki and flair, like the things that he does in his other movies that he sort of started doing in this film. And a lot of people who would really like Miyazaki's other works, I think, would be more easy to gravitate towards this as their go into Lupin the Third, because they already have that through line of already liking Miyazaki stuff. And if they're able to get into Lupin this way, maybe a good way to introduce them into more Lupin things would be like to show them, I don't know, part 4, part 5 or something, because it's sort of like the midpoint between sort of Cagliostro style things and more Fujiko Mine style things.
Right. Like, depending on which version of Lupin the Third you get, you either get a guy who's like a pacifist or a thief with a heart of gold, or a guy who's going to shoot you straight between the eyes and, ravage the women, so to speak. Very, very different interpretations of the character depending on what you see. And yeah, the Miyazaki style hero on display here is, a little more easily digestible to people throughout the years.
Yeah, because in Castle Cagliostro, like, he's not trying to have a romantic relationship with Clarice. He's more just kind of the white knight trying to save the princess in the story. And also, I think Reed Nelson, who's kind of the Lupin the Third historian has kind of talked about, where in Castle of Cagliostro, you could kind of see it as a bookend of the Red Jacket series, where Lupin's much older now and he's more mature than when he was in his Red Jacket or Green Jacket days.
There's a funny story I'll say to demonstrate just how sharp of a deviation the Miyazaki interpretation of Lupin the Third is over the original creation. Lupin the Third is created by a guy who uses the pen name Monkey Punch, and he actually, in the early 1980s, he would come to America. Like, there are areas where it's like you look on the flyer for like San Diego Comic-Con, like Monkey Punch is there. Nobody knows who he is, just some guy. And he would actually go to the anime club meeting that was in California called the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, which is basically, you know, the first like national anime club, the first organized like big anime fandom sort of thing. You know, one of the first, I should say, because there was a lot of Yamato stuff as well. But those guys would, and they still exist, by the way, but I mean, they would have meetings and they would like show things, and like the Tokyo Movie Shinsho rep would come and say like, hey, we have Castle of Cagliostro here. Do you think you can help promote anime in America? And they like said, oh, well, sure, no problem. We'll show it at Worldcon, which is the World Science Fiction Convention. They got that to happen. Nobody showed up because in 1980, everyone was like, this thing's a stupid cartoon. It's not serious. And then the few people who did show up liked it and then didn't fill out the audience survey. So that's a sort of thing that happened. But anyway, Monkey Punch himself came to the CFO meeting and sat there with the American anime fans, watched the Castle of Cagliostro like with them, or maybe he brought Mamo, I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure he bought Cagliostro. And then he commented, this is Monkey Punch, by the way, creator of Lupin the Third. He said, man, I would not have had him rescue the girl. I would have had him rape her. That is the difference between certain interpretations of this character and others, which is why it's, you know, such a divide. You know, you can be a Miyazaki fan and then you definitely don't want to watch like, you know, Island of Assassins or AKA In Memory of the Walther P-38, which is like the hard boiled, like, you know, Cowboy Bebop-ish kind of Lupin the Third. There's just so much delta.
Or like, I think on the Castle Cagliostro Blu-ray, they have an interview with Monkey Punch where he's in kind of a polite way, just kind of like, this is not my version of Lupin the Third. And he's like, Miyazaki did what he wanted to do, where I gave like the idea of the castle and did a few concepts, but I wouldn't view this as my Lupin the Third.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's forced to say that because it's become the single most famous interpretation of the character, the one that people have seen the most, and it's not his version of the creation of it. And so, you know, yeah, he owes a lot to this movie. He can't trash it because it's an excellent film. It's just not maybe the best Lupin the Third film.
I think he would probably say Mystery of Mamo is more in line with what his intentions are with Lupin the
Mystery of Mamo is definitely one of the ones that is shortlist for like closest to the original spirit of Lupin the Third.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very easy to see why people would want to gravitate towards something like Cagliostro that's a little bit more sort of not quite as mean-spirited. It's not even mean-spirited at all. Like, Lupin is a very likable character. Like, all of the characters are treated very well. Like, Fujiko is not, like, put in strange situations like she would be in other iterations, like Mystery of Mamo, for example. And it just has this sort of, like, family-friendly, very easy to watch, very just fun, whimsical feeling to it, and that's just what audiences are more likely to gravitate to, and I can't blame them for that. I mean, I love that stuff. I mean, I love a lot of Lupin. I love most of it, but I can't blame people for thinking like, oh yeah, Cagliostro is like the best Lupin or something. I couldn't blame anybody for saying that.
I think one thing, in getting more into talking about the movie, the one thing I really like about it is the pacing of the movie, because I think some things that happen with the TV specials is they kind of get too bogged down in the plot, whereas the Cagliostro plot is pretty simplistic so that you can understand it, and there's always a really cool action set piece that happens at some point in the movie. Like in the beginning, it's the big car chase trying to save Clarice, where she's almost going to fall off the cliff. Or later in the movie, the really intricate clock tower sequence where it's Lupin and Clarice trying to get to the top and escape from the Count who's chasing them, or the in between when Lupin is trying to break into the castle and he has all these mishaps of trying to not get sucked down by the water or trying to land the insane Looney Tunes like jump that he does.
That scene where he's trying to swim up the waterfall has me rolling every time I watch it. It's so funny.
Yeah, where he's like, I got this, no.
Yeah, there are a lot of sequences in this film in particular that were very influential, not just on later Lupin the Third things, but like subsequent video games, subsequent animations. A lot of years later, they were willing to come out and admit that, like, say, for example, the end sequence in The Great Mouse Detective or the Batman the Animated Series episode of The Clock King where they fight in the clock tower, like, those are directly homages to the Castle of Cagliostro. I mean, they weren't able to really admit that, at a point, but, everyone could see it was plain as day. Similarly, like if any of you ever played the now 20-plus-year-old video game Time Crisis, this is an arcade game, a light gun game.
I've played Time Crisis too.
Okay, no, the original Time Crisis is very heavily inspired by the Castle of Cagliostro. There's a girl who's kidnapped and taken to a castle by a person against her will, and you have to get into the castle, and you have to fight against enemies who look very much like the armored sort of shadow guys that are in this film. There's a lot of little elements like that in that game. And that's just, one example. Then as far as stealth things, like there's like Metal Gear, Thief the Dark Project, the latter especially, they explicitly said, we were looking at the parts of like how did Lupin get into the castle and how did he navigate around. We put that into our game as like not directly like scene for scene, but just like the methodologies of like the kind of stuff that you would do. So this is a film that, has a very far reach. And I think it's just because of, those scenes are so great.
And I think the other thing that helps it is it's not stuck in a particular time period. It's kind of got a timeless quality of just, it's a particular, like, there's nothing that screams it's the 70s like Mystery of Mamo does, or with the 80s Pink Jacket series, where it's very much an 80s vibe with the very bright pink colors, where you could kind of play it at any time and it doesn't feel dated.
Yeah, Miyazaki, he likes to set things in this sort of fantasy version of Europe that he kind of got from, going overseas to do location scouting research for some various projects that he would later incorporate into a variety of other things. And so that sort of fairy tale-ish aspect of it does mean that it's not tied to like a specific contemporary thing, which is funny because he later that year, like a year later, said, look, Lupin the Third is done and over because he's tied so closely to the 70s and the 60s.
Come on, Miyazaki. But yeah, it is interesting to look at Lupin the Third in the way that the castle itself is sort of like a character in the film, because a lot of Lupin works are very focused on like from going to exotic location, sort of like globe trotting sort of deal. Like Mystery of Mamo in particular has a lot of that. Like they're in a cafe in Paris and then they drive 5 miles and they're suddenly in the desert and things like that. But like Castle Cagliostro has like it stays in the one location, but the location is so versatile. Like there's so many different like layers and rooms and locations within just this one castle that it doesn't like throw your audience for a loop whenever you go to like a different room or a different section, because they all understand that this is just like a winding mysterious castle, and it really does help add to the story and to the mystery that they're trying to convey in the emotions of the story. But it is interesting to see like a Lupin thing that takes place like in one centralized location that is so varied, I guess.
I think that is an indirect Takahata influence. One of the things I covered in my panel was that Isao Takahata was very influenced by a French animated film called The King and the Mockingbird. He'd show this movie to everybody he knew, including Miyazaki. And It's only recently been made available on DVD with English subtitles because it's one of those things, kind of like The Thief and the Cobbler, where it took many, many years to fully complete, such the original cut was technically incomplete. So when it finally came out in Japan, like Takahata was like, we're releasing this, by the way, guys. We're doing that. So if you ever watch that film, it's very structurally similar to what the Castle of Cagliostro is like. It's set in a weird-looking castle with a bunch of varied locations. Plot line also a lot of similarities there. There's even like some weird ninja guys in that too. But yeah, like the architecture of the castle is very strange because it's the person who wrote it is this hilarious French author who mostly didn't write animation necessarily, but he wrote French films and the like. He was a poet. I don't want to bog you down with that details, but like the point is, there's a film called The King and the Mockingbird, which is a lot of that sense of like we can basically have a film take place more or less in a key location that just has a bunch of stuff in it, and not have to then go all over the place as a result. Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that is aided by a really great like a couple of scene compositions where early on we see a huge bird's eye view of the castle, of like the layout of not only the keep itself but like the surrounding lake and the aqueduct. I think that really sets things up and really is able to give you a really good idea of where everything is in the area.
Yeah, incidentally, there is in fact a real Castle of Cagliostro, and it looks nothing like what you see in this film.
I think to the characters that are introduced in the movie, like Clarice is very endearing as the damsel in distress. Like, she's not a complete damsel, where she has some initiative, like trying to escape in the beginning of the movie, or when they're trying to escape at the top of the castle, where she makes a giant leap towards the machine gun that the Count is firing.
Oh, yeah.
And which is pretty dangerous. So I think if she was just a typical, help me, Lupin, help me, then I think people wouldn't have an endearing, wouldn't feel so warm to her. And also just her warmth and caring that in the little scenes that they show, like when Lupin has taken the fall from the cliff, her getting her glove, wiping it down with some water and putting it over him, just the show of care. And I think one thing...
sort of like that resourcefulness that you kind of later would come to expect from like Miyazaki's main female protagonists.
Mm-hmm. And
you see like hints of that in this.
Now, I don't mean to, forever taint this film or anything like that, but I will also add that this character specifically is one of sort of the inspirations for Moe as a concept.
Oh well, I can forgive it.
One last thing for me, and then I'll shut up, is I like the little flourishes that are throughout the movie. Like, for example, the movie will take its time. Like at the beginning, Lupin's jalopies, one of their tires goes out, and Lupin and Jigen do rock paper scissors to figure out like who's gonna put the thing on the tire. Or
incidentally, they changed it to that Fiat 500 because that's Otsuka's car.
That's amazing.
That's pretty funny. Or when he's with Clarice doing his thief speech and he does that little trick with the flower and then all the nations of the world flags that come out.
Yeah, a lot of those little moments give it a lot of excellent character that you can like think back on that movie and be like, you know what, I thought that scene was really cool. And it does a lot of that sort of thing with some of the environments as well. Like there's a lot of shots of just like the nature and the like the environments and things like that in the film, and it really takes its time and just lets you sort of get sort of washed over in this beautiful lush environments that they've created.
And it's not a super long movie either, because like you said, it's always moving along, and yet it still has the time to let you like take in some of the scenery in less than 100 minutes. It's kind of a feat that not a lot of people can pull off. And I think a lot of it is born out of just the fact that it did have to be made so quickly. That, you know, it was kind of like a job just for Miyazaki to do, and he just kind of like put his nose to the grindstone and did it. Because for my money's worth, like, you know, you can argue over which movie is Hayao Miyazaki's best, but I think this is one of his most entertaining because it's not really bogged down with like I have to deliver a social commentary message or anything like that. There's no like got to hit you over the head with that sort of stuff, get it in there, which, you know, Miyazaki would like go for that, you know, no matter what. You know, usually when you have movies like this, you know, make it go like too far in the opposite direction where it's like it's too forgettable. I think like in this case, you know, I think just less is more, and I think it works out like really well.
Yet he still managed to get a little bit of hint of that social commentary in there, especially when like Zenigata shows up to like the little UN or whatever it was and like presents his evidence, and the politicians are just like, if we let the truth get out, that might be very embarrassing for some nations. The people will believe whatever they want to believe. And I'm just like, that's relatable.
And also, like, some Miyazaki themes are in there, like the stuff with the gyrocopter, which is the constant theme of flying in Miyazaki movies. And while there's not a very social, political, social message about nature like in other Miyazaki films, I think just the big reveal of what the treasure is a big sort of has a bit of a nature vibe where it's revealed that. And
then that became the template for like every other Lupin that was made. It said, we got to do something like that. It's very rare that Lupin actually gets the money and gets away ever since the Castle of Cagliostro.
Well, at least the MacGuffin in this case does not get immediately destroyed like in all the Lupin TV specials, where it seems he gets the MacGuffin and then for some reason
it's either immediately lost or they discard it or it's worthless, or, you know, the real treasure was the friends we made along the way.
Yep.
The real treasure was the ancient Roman cities we discovered along the way.
Now, I will say this, like in this Animage article, like just to put you an idea of like Hayao Miyazaki's mindset. For those who don't know about him, to say that he was not really too thrilled with America is sort of an understatement, right? So, when Japan had their student protests, which were basically over, is Japan going to side with the United States or the USSR? Are they going to embrace communism? Are they going to embrace capitalism? Miyazaki was on the communism side of things, as were many of the early forefathers of Japanese animation. Sort of like you're blacklisted from film, so you got to work in cartoons instead. So what Miyazaki wrote in Anime, she basically said, the Lupin the Third started to be apathetic when we were working on a TV show. We were trying to overcome that because my friends and I weren't in an apathetic mood. In Vietnam, the National Liberation Front was still fighting, so there was still hope. The National Liberation Front is the Viet Cong, people. Miyazaki was rooting for the Viet Cong, and so there was still hope because they were still fighting. So that's why he was in such a joyful, like, upbeat mood. So I really hope that they beat the Americans. So that's effectively messages that are not overtly present in this film, but on his mind at all times.
Like Daryl was saying, how Castle of Cagliostro is now like any of the other Lupin, like the Monkey Punch Lupin. I think one thing that I find jarring about this movie, is Fujiko Mine, who's usually the kind of the femme fatale seductress. Like she's basically a placeholder in this movie. Like that could be somebody else, and it'd be fine, because it doesn't seem like Fujiko to me in Castle of Cagliostro, except when she's on her bike.
Miyazaki probably didn't really know what to do with her within the context of the film that he was trying to create, because I don't know, maybe it was a time thing, he didn't have time to think of a really good idea for it, or maybe he just wanted to keep her more just vanilla in this movie.
I think he had a very different outlook of what Fujiko Mine should be. I don't think he didn't know what to do with her. I think he said, I want her to be this because I want it to not be what she's been in the past. And so he went and made Fujiko to be like, like in the episodes that he did of the TV series, it's like, okay, yeah, it's true that he's the one who's got Fujiko getting stripped naked, but she's also like, beating the hell out of everyone, jump kicking and firing around a machine gun. And so it's very important that, Fujiko fire around a machine gun and throw grenades and stuff like that in this movie, and not really be seen in a way that she's like a sidekick or an underling. And you wanted her to be, the separate entity. And
I just like you said, how all the TV specials followed a kind of Castle of Cagliostro template. It created what I like to call the Lupin gang least valuable player syndrome, where at least one of the Lupin gang members really has nothing to do, or they're just there because they have to be there.
Would you say that award would go to Goemon or Fujiko for this movie?
I would say for me it'd just be Fujiko, because the one sequence when she's doing stuff is when they're escaping from Clarice's room, but if you took that scene away, she's not really doing anything of importance.
Well, she's looking at the camera when they go down to the counterfeit works.
That's true. She does do that whole like news anchor thing, and I had forgotten about that for a while, and then I remembered that scene. I was like, oh yeah, so Fujiko actually has a whole lot more to do in this movie than I originally remembered. But
right. Plus, she's also after the treasure separately on her own, and all these things end up becoming the template of what to do with Fujiko throughout most of these subsequent 90s to 2000s works of Lupin the Third. And so you end up with that. In the case of Goemon, they also, a lot of times, writers don't know what to do with him because, he's sort of a walking anachronism, and he's
the Deus Machina of the entire franchise.
It's like, if something needs to get cut, bring in Goemon, let him do his thing, and then exit stage right, because Goemon is OP.
I've cut another useless thing.
However, Jigen is also OP, and Lupin is the most OP. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of stories as a result of Cagliostro in particular where Goemon is either like the fifth wheel, so to speak, or like the whole story is about Goemon.
Yep.
I really like that episode of that focuses on Goemon from the Fujiko Mine show. It's very funny. He's kind of like the weird comic relief of that show sometimes, and I think that kind of they made it work. They made it work pretty well.
Yeah, Miyazaki, he wanted to reinterpret Goemon to be like a funny guy who was also an anachronism. And so I think, especially when it came time to like do the dub of like even the 70s Series 2 Adult Swim one, they really went with that.
I think one thing I did just want to bring up, another maybe not narrative theme, the thing we'll see a lot of Miyazaki's stuff, just like Akira Toriyama, this sort of love of mechanical design that bleeds through. I feel like a lot of that love just kind of gets overshadowed by some of their other what we know their works. Ooh, yeah. But I really could have enjoyed seeing a lot of that stuff here with the car and the clock tower later on. And I think that really helps me appreciate this movie. I have to say, after watching it, easily one of my favorite Miyazaki movies now.
And yeah, a lot of it is just write what you know, right? Draw what you know. In the case of, for example, the Fiat, that was Yasuo Otsuka's car. Clarice's car in the beginning, that's Miyazaki's first car. So, I mean, they knew these things in and out because, as Miyazaki stated, it was a time where, if you had a car, you had to maintain your car. You had to know the whole thing about it, and it was kind of a scene, as it were. And so you had animators who had an interest in that sort of thing. Miyazaki didn't have so much interest in, say, the gun side of things. For example, Lupin the Third loses his Walther P-38 more or less immediately, and then it's never used ever again. But there's a lot of things that you can tell they put a lot of special attention to get to really nailing the look of that. And that is one of those things that fans of Lupin the Third as a general series, they have that expectation of the animation quality. And Lupin the Third Castle of Cagliostro is one reason why. I mean, that's also evident in Mamo and, various other things.
I think one character we have sort of failed to address so far is Zenigata in this film. And he's kind of like the secondary lead. Like, there's a lot of focus on Zenigata in this movie because there's a lot of scenes following him. There's that whole sequence where, and they've done this in multiple Lupin iterations, where like Zenigata and Lupin have to sort of put aside their differences to defeat a mutual foe. And I think that Zenigata, all of his scenes in this movie, I really enjoyed. I think that the characterization of him is very, very good. They make him very complex because you see him like trying to do his job, sort of fulfill his lifelong dream of catching Lupin, but then sort of realize that he is kind of out of place whenever it comes to like his like superiors. Like, he's trying to be a better person than sort of the system wants him to be.
Let me bust this guy! Look at the evidence! There's no better proof! I saw it myself! There were printing presses everywhere!
We understand that, Inspector. We have a high-level political dilemma. Interpol's exercise of authority would not be recommended in this matter at all.
What do you mean? We got Cagliostro dead to rights!
And I think that adds a lot of like depth to his character. Like, I wrote it down in my notes. He's kind of like true lawful good in sort of a industry that seems more like we're gonna be good as long as it's profitable and things like that. So I really, really enjoyed Zenigata in this movie. I don't think he was quite as wacky as we've seen Zenigata in other things, but he's definitely not as like weirdly like gritty and odd as he was in like Fujiko Mine.
Well, sure, the Fujiko Mine interpretation of Zenigata is a drastically different one where he's very cagey and very intelligent and, very capable. A lot of subsequent part due to Cagliostro, but mostly due to a variety of other things, has Zenigata as a bumbling nitwit. And so, it just depends on, which version that you get. In this one, you're right. He is the guy who is the upright, incorruptible man of justice who, is at least able to realize for the greater good, we've got to, do this. And then I'll put you under arrest, Lupin. This time for sure.
He has a little bit of Inspector Clouseau type vibe when they're doing that sequence with him being kicked out, and then Lupin runs up to, I think in the manga dub they call him the lead guard Gustav, and he's like, "Don't you see, you rube? That was Lupin!" And he kind of plays the kind of the comedy role when in the middle of that sequence, and also when he falls down the chute.
But I feel like he's not quite as bumbling in this as that he is in some other things. He's sort of like a very, very even keel sort of middle ground. Like, he's a little bit, over enthusiastic, a little bit bumble-ish, but not quite as bad as in some other ones. And I don't say bad as in like a negative thing, because I think sometimes bumbling fool Zenigata is very entertaining, but he's just more, he's kind of in the middle in this film.
I just want to say, Bill, I'm glad I'm not the only person that thought of Pink Panther when watching this.
Yeah, I would say like Daryl was saying, Lupin has its ties to James Bond, but like I've said before, it also kind of has ties to the Pink Panther franchise, and also in the supernatural elements it gets into later in other specials, sometimes Indiana Jones.
Yeah, those are my least favorite Lupin the Third things, is when they try to incorporate elements of the supernatural. I feel like it sort of falls apart once they start having like actual magic, actual time travel. That's my personal opinion, just because I think so much of it is supposed to be like, yeah, you can have like weird cartoony things, like he makes an impossible jump or he runs down the side of a building, or what have you, but at the very least, he's supposed to in some way occupy a reality.
Yeah, going through and seeing like the first time they go through the castle and you're introduced to like the main villain, I was definitely getting like a James Bond, like a Roger Moore esque feel to that, and I did catch a little bit of like Pink Panther in there. It reminded me of that.
Yeah, it's very much
certain.
that. Like, you have like especially with the Lupin specials and even some of the later anime series, you have like these sort of Bond style villains and then a Bond style girl. Because there's always another like new girl character for them to meet and not like shack up with, but save the day for them or what have you.
So one thing I definitely wanted to touch on is some of the differences in between the two English dubs, because I think that's kind of interesting. So
yeah, technically there are 3 English dubs, but 2 are full. Yeah, 2 full length.
So. Right. So the third one would be like the manga entertainment safe for kids version? Is that what you mean?
Well, what I really mean is that technically there was a video game released in the early 1980s which used footage from the Castle of Cagliostro in it. And they made their own dub for that. They had different name changes, like Clarice was called Clarissa and stuff like that. There's all this sorts of stuff in there. But yeah, technically there are 2 dubs of Cagliostro as far as, the streamlined dub and the manga one. But then you're right, there's another edition of the manga one that has like less profanity or what have you.
So I know that you, I don't know exactly how long ago it was, but I remember that there was an AWO episode where you interviewed Michael McConaughey, who played the Count of Cagliostro in the Streamline dub. Did you gain any insights about his involvement with this movie through that interview?
It's one of those things where he's been around for so long that, a lot of times they don't necessarily remember every specific thing they worked on, but I think he did remember this. And it's one of those things where Streamline, the way that they worked was that much like they used a company called Intersound for most of their dubbing, or a lot of their people came from Intersound. And Intersound worked really fast on stuff. And so, a lot of times they just remember like the working condition more than they remember like the actual thing. But in the case of the Streamlined dub, I actually think it's very well acted. I like the cast quite a bit. I like Bob Bergen as Lupin quite a bit, even though when I was talking about earlier about, Lupin the Third, being derived from Arsène Lupin, who wasn't yet in the public domain, Streamline's dub was made before Lupin the Third was in the public domain. And so they could not call him Lupin the Third. They have to call him Wolf.
Huh? Wolf! Hold it right there! You're under arrest, pal.
Gee, so glad you're safe, too.
All right, Mr. Wise Guy, show me how to get out of here.
I'm just as much at a loss as you are.
Huh? Great.
And, then once in a while when they would say Lupin, they'd say Lupin instead, because that's how it's written, like the flower Lupin. It wasn't until, the Adult Swim 2001-ish time frame where they really stuck their guns on the dub. It's like, we're going to pronounce his name Lupin.
I think the Animega releases, they called him
Rupin.
Either Wolf or Rupin.
Rupin with an R, because then they could say, look, he's not, Lupin, he's Rupin. And so they could just say, like, okay, we'll approximate the Japanese pronunciation.
I think in the Streamlined dub, they ended up pulling it off pretty well, I think, in calling him Wolf, because they sort of deliver it like it's his moniker or his nickname rather than his actual name, which is definitely the better way to go.
Right, because there are some throwaway dialogues where saying, yes, he's a descendant of that thief, Arsène Lupin.
Yes.
They throw in a line like that. So they acknowledge it. They just don't fully commit to it. So it was kind of a gray area, I think. I mean, they still called it Lupin the Third on the cover. Lupin the Third's Greatest Capers, Lupin the Third, the Castle of Cagliostro, Lupin the Third, the Mystery of Mamo. It's just in the actual dub, they would maybe say it like once. It was like a PG-13 movie. You're allowed to swear like one time. Where this was that for, not getting, the LeBlanc estate on their case or whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, I do like the actors for the Streamlined dub, but the Streamlined dub is very controversial because the script deviates very sharply from the original Japanese, as Streamlined dubs tended to do. Very heavily rewritten. A lot of things they did to conceal the fact that this is a Japanese animated work. For example, the opening credits. For many, many years, across many, many releases, it's been very difficult to get an uncut version of the opening credits sequence of this film, because a lot of companies would follow in the lead of Streamline Pictures. They'd say, hey, look, we don't want people to know this is Japanese, all right? So the thing about the original opening credits is there's Japanese credits for, directed by Hayao Miyazaki, animation director by this person. And so all that stuff of the driving to Cagliostro and, watching the train go by and all that stuff, all that is like gone from a lot of releases, including Streamlines, replaced instead with still shots as the music plays of whatever they can get that did not have Japanese text in there. And even throughout through the 2000s, there are DVD releases that did the same thing, because it's we need to get this thing on the shelf next to Cinderella, next to Snow White, next to the Disney releases, and people, we have to fool them into thinking this is a thing like Disney, right? And that was Streamline's ethos. And so edits were made to the film, rewrites of dialogue were made. The most infamous one by far is the Goemon line. There's a scene where Lupin is on fire and he's falling, and Goemon takes a sword and swings and sheaths the blade, and then Lupin's flaming clothes are cut off, leaving only his boxers, and then Goemon delivers his signature catchphrase, "Once again, I've cut a worthless object." And so in the Streamline dub, they changed his line to, "Should have worn an asbestos suit." And of all the things that Carl Macek ever did at Streamline, the thing that people got in his ass the most, they'd never let him off the case for it, and they shouldn't have, was rewriting it to "should have worn an asbestos suit."
Should have worn an asbestos suit.
But that's the sort of stuff the Streamline dub did as far as the liberties with the script. The manga dub, as you may expect of dubs made around that time, more faithful to the original Japanese text. I don't like the actors quite as much. It's not to say I dislike them, but I just don't think they're as good. But
it's very quippy. There's a lot of added lines that were not in the other dub.
Streamline was the king of that. The other thing about Streamline dubs was there can be no silence. That was one of those things about cartoons and animation for a time. It's no silence. People have to always be talking. And so a lot of those scenes of them walking through the ruins of the burned down castle, or that sort of stuff, Lupin and Jigen are always got something to talk about back and forth in the Streamline dub. And some of that carries over to the manga anime's dub.
I noticed one in particular that really stood out to me, and just flipping back between the two dubs is in the Streamline dub, whenever Lupin is descending into the dungeon for the first time, he doesn't really say anything until he gets down there, but David Hayter is cracking a bunch of one-liners about how oh, this place needs some throw pillows or something like that. And I thought in hindsight that's kind of funny, but if that was all I had, I'd be come on.
Well, I don't think they're ad-libbing. I think that's just the script they're given.
That's really... ad-libbing in the sense of, the screenplay writers are ad-libbing.
Right, that is correct. And again, it's one of those things where, there is a concern of, if you have too much parts where nobody's talking, then kids will get bored and they'll, stop paying attention, or they'll walk away or whatever. That's a legitimate concern people had for years and years and years. And I think to some extent it still exists in a lot of ways. But in the 80s, it was it's most really obvious with Saban and with Macek and a bunch of people who did dubs in this fashion.
Yeah, for me, I'm not a big fan of Carl Macek dubs. I understand at the time it made sense because of the fear in the 80s of the Japanese are going to take over. They bought the Marlins. They're gonna rule us financially.
I never liked Streamline dubs until later, when it became a little charming extra. It wasn't the default and only way you could see the thing was through their dub, where rife with mistranslations and mispronunciations and weird localization errors. I mean,
well, weren't they also trying to westernize it more because they were afraid of, like you were saying, of just how people would discover it's Japanese,
right?
They'll get scared and turn away.
They would always, because again, they would release their films in the theaters, usually very limited runs in LA and New York and stuff like that, and the art house circuit. But even there, they were like, the people going, they would be very concerned if they found out, oh, this is a foreign film. I don't want to read a movie. It's like, that was a strong hesitation on their part, and so that's how they acted. I never liked any of their dubs, really, to be honest. It's only now that you can actually get things in Japanese with English subtitles and then switch to their dub that may be like a third dub, like in the case of Cagliostro and Akira and stuff like that, and so you're like, okay, I can appreciate this for what it is, but it's not like the only game in town. That's really the issue with their dubs. It was the only way to watch the film.
And for me, I'm more attached to the manga dub because that was the first dub I saw for Castle of Cagliostro, and I really like David Hayter's kind of sensitive portrayal, kind of the young hero, like he says in his interview, the young hero voice he does. I think, and I also like Kevin Seymour, who was the voice director on the manga dub with his animes company. That he's the voice of Inspector Zenigata, and that's one of my favorite voices because it still has that gruffness that you get with Zenigata, but it's not a kind of a Yosemite Sam impersonation that I think some dubs have done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that. David Hayter really does treasure the role of Lupin the Third in this film quite a bit. Like, even to this day, most people think of David Hayter and they think solely of Solid Snake. But he is, right up there with I'm Solid Snake and I'm Lupin the Third, damn it. He's done plenty of other roles because, certainly he was in Fushigi Yugi and he did dub roles for a while. But this was around that time.
Yeah, I was listening to an old Ancast, and Brady Hartle, who worked on the Discotheque release, said that David Hayter called him out of the blue and said, "I want to
have an extra on this."
Yeah, I want to be an extra on the Blu-ray. Any way I can help, please let me know. So
yeah, I mean, again, there are elements of both dubs that are very good. It's one of those things. Much like watching this film itself, the one you see first kind of imprints on you in a way as like, that's kind of like the one, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's how it is for almost any anime. However you watch it first is how you perceive it as the best version.
Well, because everything else at that point is being compared to a baseline, especially for certain things. Sure. Like if you see them at a certain age, then it further, compounds and becomes like, a nostalgic childhood sort of thing. And so you're willing to accept, intellectually I understand this is unedited or whatever, but it's not the one I saw when I was like 9 or whatever. Like people have that reaction to certain things, like certain cartoons and stuff like that they want to see the edited one. They want like the Rock the Dragon Funimation version of Dragon Ball Z or what have you, because that's the one they saw, when they were sitting down coming home from school.
Why don't we talk about for first timers, of who's kind of new to Lupin the Third? Would you guys recommend this as a first thing to watch, or would you recommend more the newer stuff like Part 4 or Part 5?
I guess for me, I would say I would cop out and just say both. Because it'd be like, oh yeah, Cagliostro, that's a really excellent movie. But yeah, Part 4 and Part 5, really good shows. And they sort of get you to understand, because I think it's important in the onset of like getting into Lupin for the first time to sort of get a baseline understanding of like who the characters are first, and then you can sort of branch out into understanding the different tones of Lupin, because I think Lupin in both its serious iterations and its more like lighthearted iterations is like, it's still all Lupin, and the characters definitely have these through lines that are the same between the different tonal iterations. So I think that as a baseline, it's best to just understand the characters first and sort of get your feeling for which tone you like sort of as a secondary thing. And I think that Cagliostro does a pretty good job of introducing the characters, and you get a general idea of like who they are. For the most part, it's more especially for like Lupin and Jigen and Zenigata, like Goemon and Fujiko not so much, but still it's enough to really grab you. And if you're somebody that has already seen a bunch of Miyazaki movies and you like them already, which is honestly most people that have seen Miyazaki movies, it's a great place to start. But if you're looking for something a little bit meatier, probably part 4, I would say, at least personally.
And part 5 I think is better than part 4, but yeah, I mean part 4 is also very good, though it is different from many Lupin the Thirds in ways because it has a continuing storyline, which for many people is a benefit rather than a negative, because some people are turned off by Lupin the Third because like, oh, it's so episodic. You know, many years ago in like 2012, right around the time I wrote that Cagliostro thing, I wrote a piece called "What Lupin the Third Anime Should You Watch Second?" because I figured depending on whichever one you happen to see first, the answer to what you watch next differs, because my analogy I always give is that Lupin the Third is very much the James Bond of anime in many years, because, you know, depending on which phase of which version of James Bond you like, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like if you really like Skyfall, the Daniel Craig Skyfall, that doesn't mean you go back and watch like the Roger Moore, like, you know, Moonraker or something. Moonraker
or the Blaxploitation Live and Let Die.
Yeah, like, you know, those are like, they're all still James Bond, but very, very different. You know, you may not like the Connery era, or if you watched like, you know, something else, you know, you may like the Pierce Brosnan or what have you. Like, there's just so many different interpretations of it. So I just said, look, okay, if you watched this one first and liked it, then watch this one, you know. And at the time, you know, A Woman Called Fujiko Mine was on. You know, certainly Cagliostro was being re-released, and so I said, okay, if Cagliostro is the one you saw first, go watch the Fuma Conspiracy after that, right? That's like the gimme. You know, so you can go ahead and check that out. A couple other people I know have written like some articles, sorts of things of like, you know, hey, where do I even start here? And
that seems to be a lot of people's hang up, because they look at Lupin as a very intimidating, long-running, ancient thing, and they're just like, I don't know where to start, so I won't.
Right, and so the thing is, like, you know, Fujiko Mine, for example, I would, as a longtime fan, I think it's more interesting to have seen other Lupin the Third first, and then watch it so you can see, aha, here's what they're changing up. Even though technically it's like, you could argue it's kind of a prequel-ish sort of thing, though Lupin doesn't have a continuity. Which is a good thing, because you can kind of just pick and choose bits and pieces. But like, you know, if you're concerned, if you have like hesitations on things that look too old, a lot of Lupin the Third is old looking. And so if you watch like the first 5 episodes of Lupin the Third Part 5, the most recently done series, that's a story that has a start and finish. And it looks new and it's modern. You know, some people are taken by the fact that it's so modern, but, you know, that is a really solid place to start for people who have never seen Lupin the Third now, is like this latest series, that first story arc.
Yeah, sorry, little side comment. I find it kind of funny that people were kind of like overwhelmed by the Lupin franchise, because like you said, you can kind of pick and choose where you want to go, where in comparison
people don't like to hear that as an answer. People don't like to hear pick and choose. People have this weird OCD, you know, like completionist like bent to them. It's like, no, I have to start at the start. And it's like, it's not designed that way. No. I need to go to One Piece Volume 1, Chapter 1. No, you really don't. It's not designed that way. And you'll never convince people. They'll never listen to you. But it's true. It's like, you know, you're Cassandra from Greek mythology, forced to speak the truth, but believed by nobody.
I think that it's just so different than absorbing a lot of anime that's only 1 or 2 seasons. Is you kind of just start from the beginning. There's no reason not to. But I don't think there's a whole lot of shows that aren't. I mean, I don't think there's a lot of shows that the expectation is just to start with the most recent season. Like, sure, you can do that with One Piece because it's built to be, a long-running manga thing, but you're still going to be missing stuff. And I think that there's just something in this otaku mindset, this brain, where you have to get every little piece of minutia. You have to be able to catalog every reference and everything in there. That Lupin you just don't need to have that because it's really about these characters that themselves are.
Right. It's like comic books, like an American style comic book. You aren't expected to go and look at action comics from the 30s or what have you if you want to read about Superman. You just pick up like the latest beginning of a story arc or something like that. And you basically get all you need to know from, relatively minimal exposition. And so, you could just start from watching the series 2 or, series 5 or series 4 or, Castle of Cagliostro or, what have you, and you'll probably be fine.
And I think a little bit of that problem is sort of exacerbated by, the way that streaming works. Because, for example, if you go on Crunchyroll right now and search Lupin, you'll see Lupin Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, etc. And people looking for Lupin are going to be like, well, I can't just start at part 5 because that's the 5th one, and sort of that sort of idea. But back when TV was the main way that people would watch things, it's if they wanted to watch Lupin, they'd be like, okay, well, I know Lupin comes on at X time on X day. I'll just check it out sometime and see if I like it.
This is from before the concept of home video and archives of things existed. People didn't have VCRs really when Lupin the Third first started. In fact, that first series, it was canceled more or less. It didn't quite make it to 26. And much like, say, the original Star Trek, it gained its following gradually over the years through reruns on TV, and then took many years before they said, oh, let's do a second series for Lupin the Third. And that second series, the Red Jacket Lupin, as we'll call it, that's the one that was the popular one, for its era. But there was no way for you to go back and watch episode 1 if you came in 90 episodes in. You just sit down and be like, okay, we're watching today.
Right.
Yep.
Well, I guess kind of our wrap-up question is, for the Castle of Cagliostro, what is everyone's favorite scene or sequence?
So, quick question before that. Tobias, was this the first time you watched this movie?
It was, yes. I watched
Really?
that.
Well, congratulations.
We should have heard more from you.
Yeah, just give us more. What other thoughts do you have?
I mean, going into this I definitely got the sense of Miyazaki, his style there. Like I said, going in, all I know is about Lupin was the characters themselves and their archetypes. So I was sort of familiar with them just as archetypes going in. I will say my one little nitpick, and I realize this is a nitpick, the one thing I would say is maybe isn't the best Lupin to start with, is they don't really introduce the characters, but I don't know if the series ever really does. It just kind of throws you into, I don't know if that's a thing, but it kind of expects you to know who Lupin and Jigen are going in. They seem to be hanging out at the beginning, and Goemon just kind of shows up later. I was so enthralled with Cagliostro that I actually did watch part 1, episode 1, immediately after, just to see what the deal is with this Lupin thing.
So you went from Castle of Cagliostro to Lupin is Burning.
Yeah, exactly.
It's very different takes. Don't be fooled by the green jacket similarity.
But
it was.
But he got to hear the awesome original Lupin the Third song.
Afro Lupin,
Lupin the Third.
Well,
over and over again.
I can tell you, I could swear, when I had a VHS tape, the theme song, they actually pronounce it Lupin the Sado, and so I'd always make fun of it by saying, saying Loop on the Saddle. And then later on, when they did re-release, they really went out of their way to say third, in a really proper English way, and that's the version that is on all the DVDs and streaming and what have you. The Lupin the Third.
Well, they got self-conscious because you made fun of them.
I know they must. It's traveled across space and time, and got it.
Yep.
But but definitely, this is definitely a Miyazaki movie. I mean, it's equal parts Lupin movie and a Miyazaki movie. As the resident Miyazaki disliker in the group, I think this is honestly one of my favorites. I think it to me, I guess it's compared most to something like Porco Rosso, where it's more modern, more about, I don't know, it just feels kind of a post World War II-esque movie rather than a high fantasy film like Princess Mononoke, which always puts me to sleep just as a state. And I actually did, embarrassingly, I did nod off a little bit during this movie, but I think it's less a boredom thing and more of a just Miyazaki has something with his animation style and just the setting that's very pastoral that just kind of puts me in a very relaxed mood.
Yeah, I was about to say, you just got too relaxed. You couldn't resist.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is the part where like Zenigata was flying overhead, and you have like the count like machine gunning him down, and I'm over here like falling asleep. Like, I feel so bad for doing that. But
right.
No, it was still an excellent movie. Really enjoyed. Like I said, the mechanical designs really stood out to me. Very similar to Porco Rosso, for instance. And it's definitely got me. I can see why people enjoy this movie so much. I can understand why it's a classic. And probably the spark to get me into actually watching Lupin.
Mm-hmm. So now you got to be like me and watch Fujiko Mine immediately after.
Yeah, no, you should probably watch the Fuma Conspiracy as your follow-up to Cagliostro.
Yeah. Fuma Conspiracy is really fun.
Too bad it's
I'll probably go ahead and skip a lot of the early TV for now and just move on to the movies, because I know you guys have reviewed Fuma Conspiracy and Mystery of Mamo, and those sound like the next worthwhile entries for me to check out.
I mean, yeah, the episode 0 First Contact is really good. I like that one also. Yeah, you can maybe watch that one like, after Fuma Conspiracy. Don't get like, too crazy with it again. Lupin is, a la carte, and a lot of it is really good, and a lot of it is really different, and a lot of it is just like really plain.
Don't watch Dead or Alive.
I really like Dead or Alive, but it is, a movie that was meant to be like, all right, these things are getting too rote and too like formulaic, and we're gonna do this movie and bring in Monkey Punch as like, we'll bill him as the director, even though he kind of isn't really the director. And Dead or Alive's a wild movie.
Well, maybe if we get ourselves to Dead or Alive, maybe we'll have to have you come back on and defend it, because I don't know if Bill and I will be that person.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. Dead or Alive came out the exact same year as Farewell to Nostradamus.
Oh, interesting.
So there's 2 theatrical Lupin the Third animated films released in the same year. And so I think, there's some aspect to the production of those, combined with the fact that Monkey Punch is not an anime director,
right?
That you may find some issues with it. But that being said, I like In Memory of the Walther P-38 or Island of Assassins more than I like Dead or Alive.
Or A Crisis. I would say Crisis in Tokyo is another good Lupin
Crisis
the Third
in Tokyo was one of the first of like the Lupin the Third specials that was like good after like a long slump of like they weren't so hot. And then Crisis in Tokyo was like, oh, this is perfectly nice. I remember I showed it in Anime Club like many years ago, and like somebody said like, this feels like Inspector Gadget. That was their thoughts on Crisis in Tokyo.
Isn't there, like, I don't want to get into a too big long tangent, but isn't there like a connection between Inspector Gadget and Lupin?
Sorta.
Sorta.
I believe there's maybe an animation studio connection.
Yeah, maybe.
But just avoid Green versus Red, which I don't really like.
I don't like it. I don't understand why people like it. I mean,
I really hate it. It's too meta, and also
it's very meta, and it's, again, if you want to talk about a movie that like worships Cagliostro and it's like, this is how it has to be, Green versus Red is like, they're even covering the song in Green versus Red. It's like, come on.
I think the ones that have got me as a newbie interested were the new movies, Jigen's Gravestone and Blood Spray of Goemon. I've seen a couple clips. I think Dave Merrill showed the clip from Blood Spray.
Goemon just chopping off everyone's arms.
Yeah, he's just killing everybody. And
I don't think he was killing them, but yeah, he was definitely messing them up.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, if you told me they died from that, I would not object.
No. Yeah, I can't wait to actually watch that movie, but I kind of want to wait because I know it'll come eventually.
Someday it will officially be released. At
Definitely.
no specified point can I predict when.
So is it Discotek that's got the rights?
Yeah, I don't know if Discotek explicitly has the rights to that one, but they are the company that's releasing Lupin the Third at this point. No one else is really touching it. So it's a guess to me that's like, okay, it's probably not out here just because there was a bit of a delay between Jigen's Gravestone as well. And so I think it's all just contract, like, it has to be exclusive to Japan for this much time kind of stuff going on there. That's my guess anyway. I have no knowledge of that.
Wasn't it Funimation that had Fujiko Mine?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, they did.
Funimation released The Woman Called Fujiko Mine, and so they have a separate dub cast that they use. And to be honest, they're my least favorite dub cast. Again, it's not like they're horrible or anything. It's just, Funimation dubs are, competent and, they're not horrible and they're not exceptionally great. They're Funimation dubs.
I found it cool though that they brought back Richard Epcar, who was in the original Geneon dubs, and he doesn't really do Funimation dubs all that often. So I thought that was cool.
Right, Richard Epcar. Epcar is one of those guys who has dubbed multiple characters at this point for Lupin because he's been working on it for so long. And he's kind of like the guy who made that Foos dub, aka the Geneon dub, aka that cast with Tony Oliver, who was originally a Streamline guy, an Inner Sound guy. That's a big part of why those Lupin dubs are so great, are because of the work that he puts in, among other people.
I am Lupin the Third at your service.
Name's Daisuke Jigen, and I don't take no crap. I'm just a common run-of-the-mill thief. Nothing special. They call me Goemon Ishikawa.
I'm Fujiko Mine, legendary femme fatale.
I go to work every day, risking my life to capture Lupin. I'm Inspector Zenigata.
All right, guys, you ready to wrap it up?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so I guess right now would be time for your final statements about the movie, what you generally think about it, and to answer the question that we always try and answer at the end of every episode is, what is your favorite scene or sequence from the thing that we have watched? So out of all the wonderful scenes in Castle of Cagliostro, which scene would be your favorite? Go ahead and close us out with your thoughts there, Bill.
My favorite sequence has to be the car scene when they're trying to rescue Clarice when she's being chased, and just because of how wacky you can get it sometimes when they're driving up the cliff and when they're going through all the trees and they have this little flourish of, you see the bird with inside the jalopy, which is
yes.
which is really cool. And just that movie also introduced a lot of the Lupin music that you hear a lot, like this, I think it's called Sambra Tempero, which they use a lot in the action sequences, and just that version of the Lupin theme.
Yeah, the 1980 theme, I think, is the official name of it, even though the film came out in 79.
Yeah, just the great Lupin jazz music playing as they're trying to chase through. It's just real fun for me.
Mm-hmm. For you, Tobias?
So Bill stole mine. Thanks, Bill. But nice. I think my second favorite one that kind of stands out to me is the really goofy scene where he dresses up as Zenigata and convinces the guards and the police force to attack each other. Sneaks in, and then I think the little butler dude he's able to rig the statue up the pitfall trap. So as soon as they come back in, bam.
Mm-hmm. For me, my favorite one is, I mentioned it earlier, but it's with Lupin and Jigen when they're in the scuba gear trying to infiltrate the castle through the aqueduct, and Lupin is trying to swim up the waterfall. For some reason that really tickles my funny bone. I think it's hilarious. So funny. For you, Daryl?
Well, for me, I would say it's got to be how I generally try to end anime's craziest deaths, because a lot of times they put me on kind of late at night, and I usually end at midnight, and so I oftentimes like to end that panel when the clock strikes midnight in Castle of Cagliostro.
That's incredible.
Speaking of that, I like the part where like they're running around the clock tower, and the one guy gets trapped in the cog, and right when it crushes him, like the camera cuts back, and she's like, "Don't look."
Yes. Man, yeah, that's perfect. All right, guys. Well, we do have a couple of Twitter questions here, Twitter and Facebook questions. So I'll just go ahead and get into these. So John asks, I don't know enough about Lupin to ask anything super specific, but 1, apparently the latest season was criminally underwatched. Do you guys think that newer anime fans, or those who watch seasonal shows, are not as into Lupin as older fans? That there is some franchise fatigue occurring, or is it something else entirely? And he has a second question, but I guess we can go ahead and tackle that first part first.
So, Lupin the Third, the latest series, was very good, and it was like stylistically, like they had like guest episodes, like guest directors do episodes that would do like homages to previous styles of Lupin, like, you know, there'd be the first 5 episodes or like this new continuing story, and then there'd be like one episode that was like, let's do one like the 80s, which was kind of like the equivalent of like the Adam West Batman was the Lupin the Third of the 80s, like the pink jacket. And then like other ones were other like throwbacks to back then as well.
Like the in between arcs, they would basically have here's a throwback to Red Jacket, here's a throwback to Pink Jacket.
Exactly.
Which was fun.
But the thing is that Lupin the Third is this thing that's been running for a long time. He's not the fresh new kid on the block. Even if you put like a slick coat of paint on him, Lupin the Third has been around. And the thing about anime in general is every 3 months, there's 45, 50 new shows out. Yeah. Every shot. And invariably, the thing that becomes the most popular thing is a lot of times, just going to say it, a lot of times it's something that's only popular for those 3 months, and then afterwards it may as well have never existed. And a lot of times that thing, like that flavor of the 3 months, literally, is what dominates. And Lupin the Third wasn't that thing this time. I think, again, the people who wanted something like Fujiko Mine, they didn't really like get that. They thought parts 4 and 5 were a little too standard, and they want everything to be like Fujiko Mine, and nothing else is like that. So they kind of like, the hell with Lupin the Third. Right now, for example, the number one show by far and away across the entire United States and most of the world is a show called Goblin Slayer. I don't think anyone's going to remember this show once it ends. It's not that good.
Highly unlikely.
It's not that good.
Yeah, it's very mediocre. It's very average, but hey, that's what everyone happens to be watching. Lupin the Third, people are always going to remember Lupin the Third. He's always going to be around. And, the first series, like, not just the latest series, the very first series, like I said, people didn't really feel it. Like, they didn't watch it. It got canceled. And it was only when reruns that it got its following. It's very hard for people to go back and watch things that they missed. Like, oh, that was a whole season ago? Oh, don't have time for that. I got 50 new shows to watch. But I do feel that Lupin the Third Series 5, much like most of the other Lupin the Third series, is kind of a timeless thing. Like, you can go back and watch this a couple years from now. It'll still be good.
Well, like the question was saying, maybe it wasn't the most viewed in the simulcast streams, but I'm surprised that Discotheque has been able to basically release a new Lupin thing every year. Like, they release a new Lupin special every year. Like, everyone's favorite, quote unquote, Legend of Golden Babylon's coming out pretty soon. So I'm curious, like, how it's been able to gain enough of the fandom where Discotheque's able to keep releasing Blu-ray quality releases of the specials or the movies or the TV shows.
I mean, it's gotten to the point where it is popular enough, and a lot of it is, that Adult Swim, airing of the Foo's Jenny on release, had itself a fan base. The Jenny on releases themselves, because of the way they released it, the 4 or 5 episodes a disc for a show that's 152 episodes, no surprise they didn't get through it all. People, they've been wanting the show, and, when the fact that it is available on streaming, like, just enough people are going back and watching it and saying, hey, this is actually pretty cool. Let me go and buy this. For them to make it, worth their while to keep releasing it. And, I think, I hope they stay at it.
Yeah. So
I think as far as like Discotek's whole, schema, I guess, would be that they don't really need the widespread appeal so much as they get that particular niche audience. So if you look at even like the few Discotek days at their convention announcements, you've got a whole room that's, freaking out about Giant Robo or Kimagura Orange Road. But look at like the wider anime fandom, they probably don't know what either of those series are. So Lupin doesn't, I guess, like as far as that, they don't necessarily need the widespread appeal. It's just you're going to have the Lupin fans are going to buy everything that comes out. Every Blu-ray the Discotek puts out, they're going to be there.
And it won't matter how long it takes either, because like it took them a while for various reasons to get part 4 out, but I'm sure that that's still sold fairly well. But I'm thinking like, well, what if you take that and apply it to something like ReZero? Like if Funimation released that for the first time like a year from now, do you think as many people would buy it? I don't know.
No, because again, I think that's one of those shows that's the hot thing, for its time, and it's really critical to strike while the iron is hot and like have, say, Aniplex or whomever release like, the special super expensive edition so that the people who are swept up in the mania will drop the hundreds of dollars because it's the bleeding edge new thing. I question, how many of those people will still be intensely into that, 5 years from now or what have you. I mean, how much ReZero discussion or even people in ReZero costumes do you see at this point? Only a few, not nearly.
I had to think for a second. Like, that's the show with the blue and pink hair.
Yeah,
girls,
that's the only thing people were into that show for. Is the blue and the pink haired girl who was like, oh, look at the, hot babes that, are my anime wife.
Yeah, like the only reason I even still think about that show is because they announce like a new figure for that character like every month. And that's what keeps it in my mind, at least. Even though I'm not actively paying attention to it, I still just see it. All right, so the second part of his question is, what is everyone's favorite Lupin reference/influence they've seen in other anime or pop culture in general? What have been some of the most unlikely places it has turned up? I think, at least for my answer, mine's kind of a cop-out. My favorite Lupin reference is Cowboy Bebop.
That's what I was going to say.
Hey, nice. So I know Bebop is like an amalgamation of many things, but it definitely has a lot of Lupin genes in it.
Yeah, no, I feel like the general character, like the character group there in Bebop is pretty much like shot for shot. You've got Spike here as Lupin. You have the Jigen, Spike, Faye, Fujiko,
Jet.
of course, and of course Goemon and Ed, of course.
Of course, yeah, naturally.
Yeah, he just happens to look like Captain Harlock is all.
I guess for me, this is a cheat. I'm going to say for the Lupin soundtrack clone, I'm going to say Miko and Hachin.
Yeah, Michiko Hachin. Yep. Also Sayo Yamamoto work, who then worked on The Woman Called Fujiko Mine.
Yep. For sure. And Watanabe himself has said many times that he was a big fan of Lupin, watched it when he was a kid, so no doubt a lot of that sort of idea permeates his stuff. And since Yamamoto was like his understudy for a lot of different things, then obviously the sort of legacy continues to get passed on.
Yeah, I mean, she even famously noted, like, she didn't really know a whole lot about Lupin, but she liked Fujiko, so she'll make a show about Fujiko.
Fair enough. And if she wants to do the same thing again, I'm all for it. She can keep doing Lupin. That'd be great. But I do wonder. I do hope that like I know that she got a lot of more name recognition because of things like Yuri on Ice. I hope that throughout her career that like her stuff continues to come out and is really good so that people will keep going back to Fujiko Mine.
Yeah, I mean, that is a show that, unfortunately, I believe the license expired. I don't know if
It did.
Yeah. I don't think you can easily see it anymore. But then that's, yet another fine argument for why you should hoard physical media.
Yep. All right, so at Fizz versus the World asks, what's your highest score in Cliffhanger? Which Daryl sort of mentioned earlier, but not by name. So can you explain what Cliffhanger was?
Sure. Cliffhanger is actually one of the first, if not the first, like appearances of Lupin the Third animation in the West. It was a coin-operated arcade video game that was a laser disc adventure title, much like how Dragon's Lair or Space Ace were. There were a series of these games where, it would play footage and then it would prompt the player to put in an input. And if you put in the correct input, it would continue. And if you put in the wrong input, you'd lose a life. And so Cliffhanger was footage taken from the action sequences primarily of not just the Castle of Cagliostro, but also Mystery of Mamo. And so both of those things kind of made up Cliffhanger. And, they dubbed it over themselves to, sort of get whatever little incidental dialogue in there. And the thing about Cliffhanger is, unlike Dragon's Lair and Space Ace and what have you, the pattern for your player input is always exactly the same. And therefore, you can go on YouTube and see people who, either bought an arcade machine or figured out some way to, you can't really easily emulate these Laserdisc things. Maybe they got the Laserdisc for it, but they can play through the whole game with their feet or, with some sort of gimmick, because it's always the exact same inputs. If you memorize those inputs, you can beat the game. I never played Cliffhanger or saw it, out in the wild as a kid. I'd seen Dragon's Lair and stuff like that, but even as a kid, those games were out of my reach because most games cost $0.25 and Dragon's Lair would cost 50 cents or 75 cents. And I'm like, forget it. And the people who'd play it would lose all their lives instantly. And it's it doesn't seem like it's worth it. So my highest score in Cliffhanger is 0.
Is it the Dark Souls of Lupin the Third Laserdisc video games?
Well, I guess by default, since there aren't any other Lupin the Third Laserdisc video games, it is probably that. But yeah, much like Dark Souls, these are games primarily of memorization more than anything.
Right. That's how that
mind blown.
That's how that Namco Bandai game that somehow got released in the States is. It's very much a puzzle memorization game.
All right, so Terrence comments, it's not really a question, but it sort of begs a question. Me in 1995, before watching Cagliostro. What's this Cagliostro thing? The Totoro guy did that? That film was sweet. Maybe this Miyazaki guy is alright. Me after Cagliostro. Miyazaki is a freaking genius. Even if Carl Masick changed some stuff. So which that begs the question, for Daryl, since this is a guy that seems to have watched it somewhat around the time that you did, for you, how much of your early impressions of Miyazaki's work were shaped by how you thought about Cagliostro?
So I think the story never changes because I guess, I believe it was Tobias or Bill who said the same thing. Maybe by the time I saw Cagliostro, I had seen other Miyazaki things.
I see.
Because I don't really remember the timeline. I know I got Nausicaa and Laputa and Kiki's Delivery Service and a subtitled Castle of Cagliostro. I just don't remember if I saw a dub version of it first and then watched it in the Japanese, or if I saw the Japanese one and then watched the dub. But in general, I think my early impressions of Hayao Miyazaki was just the word of mouth being very strong. And then, I said, okay, well, I guess I go watch Nausicaa and then, Laputa and stuff like that. And so by the time I saw Cagliostro, I think I probably knew the score already as far as Miyazaki's awesome. And this is just another one that's awesome. But yeah, I don't know if, I just don't remember just because of the time frame. But it seems like the way I got into things was a little backwards. Though, once again, as I'm remembering, I'm just trying to piece together my childhood at this point. I remembered being told on the internet, okay, Miyazaki's the master, and the hot thing at the time was Bubblegum Crisis, so it's you got to go see all Bubblegum Crisis. And so when I found out that the comic shop, had anime, the first thing I did was I rented all of Bubblegum Crisis and watched all of that. And so I don't know if, eventually afterwards I rented the Castle of Cagliostro from there, because I did rent it from there eventually. But at some point I was also getting the tapes. So, but at the same time, should have worn an asbestos suit versus once again, I've cut a worthless object. When I first heard should have worn an asbestos suit, it didn't strike me as wrong, or as what the heck is that? So I must have seen the dub first. And then went and tracked down the subtitled copy. That's my own my only guess. But I don't think it was my impressions of Hayao Miyazaki. I think it was set between all the discussion online being this is the greatest guy, and just having seen the other movies and being wow, the movies are really good.
Well, I guess that would make sense because you were sort of, getting your influence from like an established community of people that already sort of knew the guy's work. But like for me, for example, like whenever I was first introduced to Miyazaki, it was through Spirited Away. So like my frame of reference for his work was like, oh, Miyazaki, he's the Spirited Away guy. So I would watch the movies that I would approach afterwards with that frame of reference, not as like, I knew Miyazaki as a creator, but I just knew him as the guy that made Spirited Away. But it seems like since you didn't sort of come into Cagliostro blind, you wouldn't have that train of thought.
Yeah, it sounds about right. Like, because I don't think I would have like randomly picked up Cagliostro off the shelf had I not known. Like, oh, this is Miyazaki, who did this. I didn't think of it as like, oh, this is Lupin the Third, because what's Lupin the Third?
I think that as for myself, if I had seen Castle of Cagliostro instead of My Neighbor Totoro as my first Miyazaki film, I would probably be a better person today.
Yeah, I didn't see My Neighbor Totoro for a while. And to be honest, like I don't like hold up My Neighbor Totoro as like my favorite one or this all-time great masterpiece like most people do. I mean, it's fine. It's, it's Totoro, but it's not like this movie that I'm like, I'm going to go back and rewatch Totoro.
No, but like that was my first movie because it was on the news. Like Disney had picked up the rights, I think, to distribute it, and it was like this Japanese thing by this guy. He's like the Japanese Spielberg or whatever. And like I remember renting it and watching it, being really excited to watch this thing that everyone was talking about, and I didn't remember a single thing of it. I'm pretty sure I fell asleep watching Totoro as well.
The hype train killed it.
Yeah, I just didn't enjoy. I went back. I've of course gone back and seen it. Yeah, it's a fun kids movie, I guess. But I think I would have enjoyed as a kid. I would have enjoyed Cagliostro more.
Bill, it's not the hype train. It's the hype cat bus. Get it right.
I fell into that one.
All right, so the final question here is sort of a jokey one, and it's because I posted this question in the Vintage Anime group and just to get some feelers for some questions, and some of the comments were just like, nice, I want to listen to that. I'm just like, that's not a question. But anyway, somebody asked, is this the same Surat who used to be on IRC?
The answer is yes. I was on FNet, Pound Anime ! Not to be confused with Pound Anime. And I was a kid. I was a teenager, like 13, 14 or whatever, maybe 15 or what have you. The point is that everyone else in that channel were like Anime Expo staffers or ASEN staffers who were all like, dealing with their relationship drama and whatever. And a lot of times, like, they didn't have the patience for an annoying punk like me who was just like spamming a bunch of non sequitur trash, aka what I'm still doing to this day at age 38. But that being said, I met some people in there who, they said, hey, I am the secretary or what have you for the anime club right around where you live. And so I went over there and I was the youngest kid there. I was 16. Again, once I got my car, everyone else is in their, mid 20s and above. I was the youngest person. And now I'm too old to go to anime clubs at this point. Because I'm in my 30s and, if I ever find one that's local and I show up there, I'm twice the age of everyone there. And it's like, okay, I can't be here. But yeah, no, it's me. I don't use IRC anymore because, people don't. But at the same time, like, my nick was just Surat because I'm on creative. And like, when there was a net split or something like that, I would be Surat D. When I'd go on forums and stuff, I just use my full name. I've never had a pseudonym like everyone else, like internet culture, like to say like, oh, don't use your real name for anything. I always, my last name was good enough, but nowadays it is usually too short to meet the username requirement. Like it's only 5 characters or what have you.
Surat Express 999.
Yeah, well, I mean, it worked for Miles, right?
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I mean, no, it's me, man. I mean, I don't know necessarily everyone's real names from that channel. I just remember, a lot of those guys, are still around. Still being like interpreters or anime convention staff. A lot of them were like, people. A lot of them are people I never met. But the few people I did, they helped me out. And some of them I'm still in contact with to this day.
Cool. That's awesome.
I think to sort of like tangent off of that, I think it's kind of fascinating that the way we've grown up with the internet. With you kind of starting off, the old 28.8 modem and logging into Usenet, and then sort of shifting into IRC, and then like meeting these people all across the country, the world, and just like you said, just kind of this being a goofy kid.
14.4 modem, but yes.
Oh, okay, right. Jeez. But yeah, just kind of like evolving like with that, and then being this kid as being this goofy guy talking on the internet, but then evolving into like doing podcast and writing and like being a part of the community and being an important part of the community. I just kind of seeing that evolve over time, and you're mentioning like in your 30s, like so am I at this point, and it's kind of fascinating to look back at this, how we've changed in the culture itself. Now we're all on Twitter in the same way, and being able to interact with these big name fans or these other people, and sort of just be a part of this evolution of anime fandom.
Well, I don't know if I'm part of the evolution. Like, I think I stayed in the same spot as the 90s and like the rest of the world grew up, because when I was of that age, like part of the reason IRC was a thing is because like I didn't know anime fans. Like there weren't anime fans for me to hang out with. There weren't conventions for me to go to. These, like, the online sphere was the only interaction I had with other anime fans. And right now, it's kind of the same deal. Like, I'm not really going to, like most anime, like in-person fans are kids in high school, kids in college, or what have you. I don't really like hang out with them. Like, online is kind of where I am. And so other than conventions, because now there's conventions. And even then at the convention, I'm kind of the guy who's like, well, everyone else is doing this. Let me stick to what I'm doing, which is panels, and people can show up to the panels if they want to. But most people at conventions are, half my age, if that. We're getting to the point where it's like a third of my age. So, yeah, I mean, in that sense, yes, everyone is more together now. Like, I just grew up in the wrong time, right? Because everyone now is using the internet to get together and meet up and, do what have you. I'm, using the internet in much a similar way as I was using in the 90s. Much faster download speeds, though.
The internet as a whole, no matter what format we use, is still, I think, primary communication for a lot of these communities. I just think like our roles have kind of changed, and we've sort of grown up in some ways. Like you mentioned yourself, like being surrounded by all these people that know more and are actually involved in the actual community. But now you've gone on and sort of doing your podcast and the panels and whatnot. And I can kind of see the same thing with myself. Like I remember my first con was AWA in 2004. Like I remember going to your panel of Doom back when it was stuffed in one of the smaller little rooms, and to see now like with us doing panels and us doing podcasts and be able to have you on, it's just kind of the circle of life that I mentioned in one of my panels. It's kind of crazy to see this and to have these people that are going to our panels for their first convention, and to see where they're going to be in 10 years or so, if they're still going to be going to these conventions.
I would like to say I planned my schedule around going to a lot more panels at AWA, and a lot of them were your guys' panels. And then each time I'd show up and be turned away because the room was full, and they put you in like these tiniest rooms imaginable. Meanwhile, the video rooms are large, empty rooms.
Yep. Well, we appreciate your attempts, so we thank you for that. And, well, I guess that sort of brings us to the end of our episode. And unless anybody else has any final thoughts that they want to throw out there.
Well, now has never been a better time to get into Lupin the Third. You no longer need to send away for tapes. You no longer need to know a guy. You no longer need to wait for midnight on a weekend or whatever it is that, the time when Lupin the Third was on. Like you said, if you've got Crunchyroll, and you probably do, it's the exact same site that all the favorite shows that you're watching on now are on. You can just type Lupin into that, and you'll get a whole variety of stuff, plus the Discotheque releases, which are really good quality stuff, even when the film itself is of, not the best quality. There's a lot of times good extras and things like that on there. You really got to give it to Reed Nelson and Brady, and, really want to say, like, yeah, that community of dedicated Lupin the Third fans is, out there and doing the work. So yeah, I mean, just jump in, man. Just pick a spot, see what looks interesting. If you think it's bad, just pick something else that's a different style, and you're probably likely to find at least some take on Lupin the Third that you will like. And I can almost guarantee you that Castle of Cagliostro will be one of them.
And it's on Netflix.
That also helps. With, I think, the streamlined dub.
I don't think the streamlined dub is the one that's on Netflix. I'm 90% sure that it would be the manga anime's dub. I don't think they would pick the streamlined
Last time I
one.
checked, it was the streamlined dub, but maybe I was in a fog when watching it. I'll have to double check. I just wanted to give a shout out to go check out or go buy the Castle of Cagliostro Blu-ray. They put so much work into that, where there's they got high-res print versions of art books and concept art, and basically put as much as they could on that Blu-ray, where if you want to relive the 1980s subtitles, you can do that on that Blu-ray.
And when we say 1980 subtitles, what we mean is when TMS went to the CFO and they showed the one at Worldcon, and they had like some film festival and stuff. That's a subtitle one, because Streamline never released a subtitled one. But that said, yeah, that Discotheque release is the definitive release. It's really inexpensive. As I check on Amazon, it is $15. So
such a steal.
It's really, really good stuff. Everyone really broke their back making it the best possible release that they could. Definitely, if you want to experience the film, there's no better way than that Discotheque Blu-ray.
Yeah, Discotheque does great stuff. Like, Daryl, thanks to you, I was able to get through Napoleon's Dictionary with your commentary.
That's right. It's not a very good special, but Mike Toole and I have a pretty good commentary track, I think.
That movie was a slog, but your commentary helped me get through it.
Right. That would be like an example of like one of those early 90s ones where it's like, okay, well, they're just kind of succumbed to a formula at this point. And yeah, as we talked about in the commentary track for that, that one had some other production related issues, and just due to the fact of being turned around in such a short time. But yeah, I mean, no, Discotheque is the company for releasing all Lupins great and small.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that brings us to the end of our show. And so thank you very much, Daryl, for coming on the show. It was a great time. Really appreciate it.
No problem. I'll be glad to, be dragged into this, whenever you see fit. Though, as I look at the recording time, as is the case whenever I'm a guest on somebody's show, it's gone on probably about 2 to 3 times longer than you were expecting.
That's fine. People still seem to listen anyway, so I guess that's cool. And yeah. So that's awesome, but thank you again. Where can people connect with you on social media?
You can find me on Twitter at DARYLSURAT, just my name. Again, I'm very unoriginal. We also have a Twitter account for the Anime World Order podcast at Anime World Order, but that one is mostly just an automated one to post when new episodes are out if you aren't subscribed to the feed. So over at www.animeworldorder.com or iTunes or, Stitcher or wherever. No, I don't think we're on Stitcher. No, we are on Stitcher. We're not on Spotify. Okay, yeah. But
yeah, Spotify's got a weird thing where you have to own all the music in your podcast to be able to put it up there.
Right, and we don't own anything. And so we were like, we're not going to risk, being banned, because it's like if you get banned from Spotify, you also get banned from your hosting. It's something ridiculous.
Ooh, that's really hard.
You can't just go to their website and apply to be on Spotify. You have to do it through your podcast host or something weird like that. But yeah, we're not on Spotify.
And Bill, where can people talk to you about Lupin the Third on social media?
You can talk to me at a very original name, WB Foreman, FOREMAN 999 on Twitter, where I will talk about Lupin all the time, Hearthstone all the time, and One Piece all the time.
What about you, Tobias?
You all can harass me for being on a Lupin podcast and not seeing any Lupin on Twitter at Reverend_Tobias.
And you can get spammed with any and all Kingdom Hearts 3 related news for the next couple of months and way back into the past by following me at Bebop Shock, and that's Bebop as in Cowboy Bebop and Shock as in Bioshock or You Are Shock or whatever it is that you want to get shocked with. And you can find all the Third Impact anime related things over at thirdimpactanime.wordpress.com or facebook.com/thirdimpactanime. You can also find our podcast on pretty much anywhere. We're on Google Play, iTunes, Stitcher, And our main host is Podbean, and that's probably the best one, at least I think. Podbean has a really good app if you guys have not checked that out. But anyway, thank you again, Daryl, and thank you, Bill, and thank you, Tobias, for being on the show, and we will see you guys on the next one.
Hare